All right, what's up? Welcome. So we do have a new cringecore song that just dropped yesterday. If you missed it, shout out to Rastaman man. Rastaman be mixing up the turntables, putting down the beats left and right, yeah. What's up? Did y'all hear the new song? So I did a live stream. I don't even remember what it was, and I made a joke about racist Dracula. And my boy over here, shout out to Skippy Jackson. He said, that right there be a Irish song right there. I make it into the song right now, and they go to do something like that.
There's a ghost in the back to make you feel wet, colorblind, hunger in your eyes. That the day will be great. Don't you draw me ethnic blood, not discriminate me. Culture in the room, give drinks of offensive drinking pain. Blood thirst gonna get you down. Out of his fingers to lead. One look and he's some outside eyes. All you do is bleed. Racist Dracula. I say there's a curse in the back to make you feel weak. Skin tone down in the sunlight.
All right, that's enough of racist Dracula. Anyway, that's the new cringecore song that just dropped. Thank you to Rasta Mangoon. He put together a nice mix. So shout out to him. What's up, y'all? So we had a lot of fun yesterday getting into the old classics. Diving into the old debate reviews. Doing it up like we used to do it back in the old days of 2 years ago. Thank you. I am a handsome vampire. That's what all my thought bride bitches been saying for many years. As racist Dracula, me got 3 bride at least. Running over there on the cam girls right now doing the OnlyFans. Yeah, what's up? Y'all love it, right, when we do these debate reviews. Debate reviews. Y'all love the debate review? We'll pick back up where we were because we were having so much fun yesterday before I had to go do Lord Voldemort's show. We were having so much fun talking about crazy stuff. We saw that this discussion, which Brett Weinstein says is the most important discussion ever on the internet. So we definitely want to be over here involved in the most important discussion. We got to learn from it. We got to hear the intellectual dark web blowing our minds with unfathomable intellectual sophistication and depth, such as questions of what if a bullet was in a gun but then out of the gun, and then you could trade the gun after multiple checks at the local casino for $1 million, or porcupines that were automatically loaded, like a assault rifle porcupine. Basically, a porcupine has an assault rifle that can shoot his quills, right? We heard stories about infant sacrifice. I mean, we're just all over the place, right? And we came up with some algorithms yesterday. So let's see where the intellectual dark web is taking us next in this classic. This is, we'll do a little bit more of part 2. I was starting to get a little impatient with part 2 because it's kind of dumb. And then we got a part 3. And did you even know this goes on into a part 4? Thank you, Kate. Yes, the internet has now confirmed that I am funny. The last few streams that we done reacting to the TikTok witches, the TikTok cringe, the TikTok ghosts and UFO cryptid people, the TikTok star seeds. We have finally confirmed, right? Internet confirmed officially that I'm funny. So all the haters over the years who said, you're not funny, you cannot make people laugh, you shall fail at life, you will become a gutter bum, you are a loser man. What's up now? Where you at now? I got a Movado watch. I got a puka necklace. I have a lover in the other room. I have an internet channel and a podcast on the internet featured on Apple Podcasts. Not everybody can have that. I have succeeded. I've achieved the pinnacles of what we might call power and fame, or e-celebdom. If you would hit like and share, let's get into it. Not everybody can go to the Movado outlet, right? Not everybody can do that. You got to be at a certain level of internet power. What's up? Shout out to all the peeps in the audience. Where is everybody tonight? It's Saturday. There's nothing else to do. I can tell you that. Right? Sam Harris said you got to up level. Right? Well, we already up leveled. We're at the top right now. Only place to go from here is sideways, I guess. Because if you're at the top, you can't. I'm not going down. I assure you that. So we can go to the left or to the right. I guess frontwards or backwards. Or even diagonals. Right? That's the only directions to go. I could forever go diagonal. I'll still be at the top. You like it in the booger whistle. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Let's get into it. Now, where were we at? I don't remember, but let's see. Let's go. And again, the volume is all the way up. The original file is low, so stop fussing at me. It's not my fault. But let me see. Maybe I can try to turn them up a little more in internals. Let's see.
Place where it needs to be developed, because I see that the attempt that you make to derive the world of value from the world of facts as justifiable given what it is that you're attempting to do.
This is the is-ought question.
The world a better place. But there's a massive gap in there. It's like, how do you do it? Because the objection that you place on my reasoning, let's say, which is, well, the problem with these texts is that there's an infinite number of interpretations, and which of them how can you determine which of those is canonically correct, is exactly and precisely the same criticism that can be levied against your attempt to extract a world of value from the domain of facts. It's the same problem.
Well, it's not an infinite
That's
number
true.
of interpretations.
Jordan is correct here.
But I allow
it's
for...
close enough to infinite so that...
Well, it might be... I mean, that's why the moral landscape for me is a landscape of peaks and valleys. And so, I'm totally open to the possibility, in fact, certainty, that there are different...
So the moral landscape is a landscape full of peaks and valleys on his secular scheme. Then we don't actually have any benchmark by which to judge the peak versus the valley. You see that? So it just becomes an exercise in constant ad hoc just assertion. Because the question is, where do we derive values? And he says, well, the moral landscape will include peaks and valleys. Peaks and valleys in reference to what? Like, if one is a peak and one is a valley, that requires some kind of standard to say which is which. And 1 point for Jordan Peterson here for making that point, which is what we've been saying for a long time.
Different ways for similar minds, and certainly different ways for different minds to be constellated so that they have equivalent but irreconcilable peaks on the landscape. So there's a lot of well-being over here, and there's a lot of well-being over here, and there's a valley in between. And so it's a kind of moral relativism. It's kind of like, this is great and this is great, but these are irreconcilable, right?
Well, I'd like to see that made more concrete, and I need to know how that fits in with your.
Yeah, exactly. Like just saying that, oh, it's a kind of moral relativism, and there's peaks and valleys for well-being. So again, what do we say? That we would have appeals to what's true and what's good, value judgments versus bad and false. And he just admitted that it's a kind of moral relativism, which is never going to give him the thing that he's trying to. It's just it's an exercise in dishonesty and contradiction.
Because one of the claims that you make in the moral landscape is that the distinction between the bad life and the good life is not only it's a factual distinction.
Yeah.
It's universally apprehensible and true. I think it's your fundamental axiomatic claim. And I don't see how that's commensurate with the position that you just put
Correct.
Well,
forward.
so,
Yes.
so here's
Basic,
the position.
yeah, exactly.
And you can forget about morality as a concept for this. I mean, I think the starting point is deeper than morality. The starting point, and this is our starting point.
I mean, so we're talking about ethics and value judgments, and then he just says, forget about morality. So does he actually sense that this is just gibberish nonsense? He knows this deep down, and it basically is now just talking around it. Well, let's forget about morality, and let's just talk about well-being. What is well-being? I mean, again, this is what passes as intellectual public discourse.
All of us right now in the universe. The starting point is we are conscious, right? We have a circumstance.
We're conscious.
So
his self-evident starting point, and if you watch his other podcasts where they discuss this, he believes in self-evident maxims and principles. So his self-evident starting point is consciousness. Is he not aware that pretty much most of modern atheistic materialist philosophy, of which he is a member, rejects or doesn't have any answer to the question of consciousness? In other words, that's the central issue, is how can we explain or give an account for this mysterious thing known as consciousness? It's really been kind of one of the central philosophical questions for, I don't know, the last 100 years. And he says, well, let's just start with consciousness. Like, I'm sorry, what is that on an atheist materialist worldview? And by the way, aren't you a determinist?
It's of qualitative experience. And
he's sort of staring at his hands and making it up. It's consciousness is the starting point, which is qualitative experience. So consciousness is experience. Just nonsense phrases, just nonsense words, right? Consciousness can't be identical to experience, because experience is something that a conscious mind has. The knower has the knowledge. That's like saying knowing is knowledge. No, knowing is an action of knowledge that a knower has, a self. So consciousness has to be had by some underlying what is called transcendental unity of apperception. That's just Kant's fancy term for the self. Something that is the haver of the experiences, right? The self. But the question is, where or what is consciousness if you make the mind the brain? Which, of course, all the materialists do. That is, the reductionist materialist move is precisely why they're determinists, because the mind is simply the brain. There's no distinction between the two. But you see all of the stupid quandaries and contradictions that he's already caught in here.
Again, this is true however we understand consciousness, whatever is actually happening. We could be living in a simulation. This could be a dream. You could be a brain in a vat. Consciousness could just be the product of neurochemistry, or we could have eternal souls running on somehow integrated with the brain. Whatever is true, something seems to be happening. And these seemings can be really, really bad or really, really good. We know each one of us in our lives have experienced this range of possibility. And yes, there are caveats here. There are hard and painful experiences that have a silver lining, right? That give you some other capacity where you could say, well, that really sucked, but I'm a better person for it, right? And we can understand what it means to be a better person for it in terms, again, of this range of experience, which I'm calling, subsuming all of this, the positive end of this as well-being, which is to say that I'm a better person for it because now, having endured that ordeal, I am capable of much greater compassion, or I appreciate my life more. The cancer made me a better person. Now that I'm cured, I value each moment of life more than I ever did. All of these claims are intelligible within a context of an open-ended context of exploring this space of.
Right, so it's not technically my Discord anymore. I've gave it away, but there's over 10,000 people in there, so I'm still in there. But anyway, so hopefully we can get somewhere of it. Like, we're just getting assertion after assertion, and again, I don't think it's like he doesn't really know what an argument is. It's just kind of like, maybe he thinks that you can't argue these types of things and you just kind of have to make it up as you go, right? Maybe that's his view.
Possible experience. So what I'm saying is, forget about morality, forget about right and wrong and good and evil. What is undeniable is that what we have here is a navigation problem. We have a space of possible experience. And again, this is not just a human problem, this is a problem for any possible conscious mind. We have a space of possible experience in which we can navigate, and things can get excruciating and pointlessly horrible, where there are no silver linings, and this can happen individually in some episode of madness that never ends. If there really is a Christian hell to go to, well, then it's going to happen to me after I die, right? Given what I've said on this day.
Right. So this is just Descartes' argument that consciousness is, I think, therefore I am. So there's some seeming of happening occurring. So that is my self-evident starting point. This raw seeming of occurring. But of course, that doesn't actually work as an argument in the way that Descartes frames it, and subsequent people from Kant to Bertrand Russell have severely critiqued this notion of a self-evident foundationalist starting point. And it's pretty easy to critique it because, remember, Descartes' idea is that I think, therefore I am is a great starting point because no one could doubt this. It's the most fundamental thing that you couldn't theoretically doubt. However, Descartes was prior to the rise of linguistic philosophy. And so Descartes didn't think to question linguistic structure, because to say that thinking is occurring, or thinking it seems to be occurring, or I think therefore I am, assumes the propositional value of sentences and that words have meaning. That's a prior assumption to the idea that thinking is occurring. So, because the phrase itself is an argument, right? So it's assuming things that have not yet been proven. And if it's assuming things that are not yet proven, then it is not self-evident or foundational. Because self-evident beliefs have to be self-evident, they have to be foundational, they can't rely on other beliefs or other things that are not yet proven. So Descartes' project fails. Later, other people critique it. Russell says it's a non sequitur, right? Because thinking is occurring, it doesn't follow from that the self exists. It's a leap. Kant has a very devastating critique. When you say thinking is occurring, or there's a happening and occurring are time determinations. Time hasn't been demonstrated yet. So to say that I think, therefore I am, and that thinking is happening or occurring, to occur is for something to happen within time. But has Descartes proven time yet? Or what? Do we have any idea what that is? No. So what he's chosen as his Enlightenment rationalist starting point, which, by the way, contradicts his materialist determinism, because if the self is just a materially determined thing, the self is not really any different than any other chemical reaction, and so essentially it's illusory. And the choices that the self makes between the true and the false, the good and the bad, are also therefore illusory, because they're not really choices, they're merely determined. And so there's no way in this determinist scheme to choose between the good or the bad or the true or the false. There's just what is. But again, it's like he's never conceived of these or no, it's like he's not even heard of these very well-known critiques that, like, if you had an undergrad in philosophy, you would be familiar with some of these critiques, right? They're pretty well known. But I think that because there's such an ignorance in terms of philosophy and the history of thought in the West, that a lot of these kind of people can get away with this. They can do a kind of intellectual charlatanism and get away with this kind of stuff, either because they know people are ignorant of the critiques, or they themselves are ignorant of the critique. Either way, it's just still kind of a very simplistic, low-level discourse.
I
mean, let me put it this way: if you want to understand from a person who, you know, studied philosophy at the grad school level, and then hears stuff like this, this is basically the equivalent of conversations that occur in your first or second philosophy course, right? So if you took Philosophy 101 and then Philosophy 102, you would be having these kinds of conversations. And so this is what kind of the public thinks of as deep, but it's not. It's really introductory level stuff.
Matters who's right. Obviously, if I knew that an eternity of fiery torment awaited somebody who didn't make the right noises about one faith or another, well, then it would only be rational.
Didn't make the right noises about what? So in other words, our words are just random noises generated by a chemical reaction machine. Well, if that's the case, then your arguments against Christianity or theism are also meaningless chemical reactions generated by the determined meat machine. So again, it's like no self-awareness. I mean, none of these people wouldn't last like 2 minutes in a presuppositional critique. And that's why, you know, we showed that in the Matt Dillahunty debate. He lasted about 10 minutes before he just got mad and started just asserting arbitrary ad hoc statements over and over and over. And he thought that constituted an argument. And the whole discourse was about 15 feet above his head, and he never caught wind of it until the after stream when he had to bring in a couple professors to help him out.
To make those right noises, right? So it's my bet. I'm placing a bet on certain pictures of reality being wrong, but the reality is we're navigating in this space, and morality and ethics are the terms we use for how we think about our behavior affecting one another's experience.
Yes, Determined Meat Machine is my metal band. Exactly.
Determined Meat Machine! Determined Meat Machine!
So if you're in a moral solitude, if you're on a desert island, or if you're, you know, alone in the universe, morality is not the issue you need to worry about, but well-being still is an ever-present issue. It's possible to suffer, and it's possible to experience bliss. And
so why should we prefer bliss to suffering? And by the way, I could take this same position and say that, well, I prefer my own bliss to other people's suffering, or perhaps I enjoy and achieve bliss from causing other people to suffer. And quite a few people in the world actually do believe that. They are masochistic. They do enjoy hurting other people and deceiving other people. Duper's delight. This is a real thing. They enjoy conning people. There's a thrill they get. And I mean, it's well known. Flannery O'Connor wrote a whole novel about it, right? Wise Blood deals with that. Melville's novel, Confidence Man, deals with that. The novel is about the thrill. In part, it's about the thrill of this. Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground. The whole point is that if man's problem is knowledge, a lack of knowledge, then why are there evil geniuses and why are there evil psychopaths who get pleasure in hurting and destroying other people? And so this idea that you can divorce well-being from ethics is false, first of all. And then that you could assume that there's a self-evident ethic that tells you that it's preferable for some reason to prefer pleasure to pain is also arbitrary. But you see the basic level floundering and contradictions that these kinds of positions are forced into. And a lot of it has to do with rejecting philosophy. But at the end of the day, it's not about philosophy. It's about the fact that without theism, trying to construct these metaphysical, these anti-metaphysical metaphysical systems, they're doomed to failure. They don't work.
And perhaps something beyond that. And the horizon in both directions is something we'll never fully explore very likely. I mean, we don't know how good things can get, and we don't know how bad they can get. But that there's a spectrum here is undeniable. And I would say that my moral realism simply entails that we acknowledge that it's possible not to know what you're missing. It's possible to be living in a way where you are less happy than you could be, and not to know why, right? And just not have the wisdom to make the changes. And that matters. If anything matters, that matters. And it matters to us individually, and it matters to us collectively. And that mattering subsumes everything we can intelligibly want in this domain of value. And so again, it's the cash value of any value claim is in the actual or potential change in consciousness for some conscious system somewhere, sometime. And that's my claim. And that's.
Can I try to get? I would like you each to clarify something. So it sounds to me, Sam, like you are hypothesizing that a rationalist approach will always beat a traditional metaphorical approach with respect to the generation of well-being.
Well, not always, but there's so many obvious downsides to the traditional sectarian dogmatic approach that we should want to get out of the religion business as fast as possible.
Okay, but as fast as possible, but do you mean that it has always been true that we should always have gotten away from it as fast as possible, or do you mean now we should get away from it as fast as possible, but there is a point somewhere in the past where it might have been true that actually the best, the richest path to well-being might have been encoded metaphorically?
Oh yeah, that's certainly possible. And in fact, you might even say it was likely based on the fact that we have all of these systems still around. Right?
Okay. So we still have the systems around in part because we still think in metaphor, and we actually can't help it because half of our brain is oriented towards metaphor. But
can I get you to clarify something now?
Yes.
Okay. So you have argued, and you've actually quite surprised me by doing so, you've argued that the dogmatism is a bug and not a feature. You've argued...
No, it's a bug and a feature.
Okay, it's a bug and a feature. Good. So,
yes.
But what I thought I heard you say was that the resistance to update was a problem, that effectively it was an obstacle.
Yeah, so is lack of resistance to update.
Right, okay,
There's
good.
problems everywhere, man.
Well, there's a tension. Okay.
There is a tension.
There's a tension.
There's a terrible tension.
Okay.
Right, well, look at it this way.
Problems
Look at it this way.
everywhere, man.
Most new ideas are stupid and dangerous.
But most...
A little bit of Boomer Garcia coming out there, right? I need to make Boomer Garcia into a character. Because Jordan channeled a little bit of Boomer Garcia. Oh, there's problems everywhere, man.
Some
Old
of them
ideas
are vital,
are as well. I mean,
but some of them are vital, right? And so we're screwed both ways. It's like, well, if we stay locked in our current mode of apprehension, all hell's going to break loose. If we generate a whole bunch of new solutions, most of them are going to be wrong and we're going to die. And so what we need to do is, it's a Darwinian claim in some sense, is that despite the fact that most new ideas are stupid and dangerous, a subset of them are so vital that if we don't incorporate them, we're all going to perish. That's the bloody existential condition. And so now, and part of the issue here, and I think...
Somebody made an interesting point that this whole discussion is really a controlled magic circle dialectic, because Jordan Peterson is an agnostic, and what's-his-face, Scam Harris, is a atheist. So you're forced to then choose the sides between two ridiculous positions, right? I thought that was a good insight here. So we're supposed to now look to agnostics to make arguments for theism. I'm baffled as to what's going on, and it's like people. I don't know. I guess people just don't have any clue what's going. It's just people are ignorant. I guess there's just mass, insane levels of ignorance. The dysgenics has worked. The population has become a bunch of slow boys, and so the people with the medium level IQ, like Luke Wilson in Idiocracy, are like, this is what they think is like the height of sophistication, is a moral relativist having an atheist moral relativist arguing with a psychotheology agnostic. And this is like this is the height of intellectual sophistication.
That this is, the problem is that, let's take the dogma idea. Okay, so there's the dogma incorporated in the books, but I'm going to throw away the books because the dogma was there before the books. And then the question is, where was the dogma? And
what?
The answer was the dogma.
So I think Jordan's talking about there was theological teachings orally, I guess, before they were written down, I guess is what he means. Okay, I can agree with that. But, of course, I don't think he ever really explains what that is. And in his mind, rabbinical Judaism today is the same as, Genesis or whatever, which is not the case, because even today's liberal Jewish scholars admit that the departure of Christianity and Judaism in the 1st and 2nd, 3rd century really marks off where Judaism goes in the direction of being strictly rabbinical. And then you get the strict Unitarianism. It had Unitarian elements prior to that, but confessionally, theologically, by the time of Maimonides, it gets explicitly Unitarian in a philosophical sense. And so it's not until 2nd or 3rd century, I think, right, that you have the rejection of the 2 powers, 3 powers in heaven, and explicitly in anti-Christian polemic. But I think that if you don't know that, then you kind of default to the natural theology perspective, which is kind of where Jordan Peterson is at. And so he's kind of making these generic theist arguments like, well, the ancient root, right, prior to Christianity, prior to Islam, must be this Judaic Unitarian generic theism. But if you go and watch the debate with Trent Horn, we showed how ridiculous this is from the Christian perspective. To think that the Old Testament is this strict Unitarian deity, and then in the New Testament we tack on the Trinity as this new idea. That is so far from what's actually in the Old Testament that it's really revolutionary, and people are so ignorant, and this is so mind-blowing to them that when you try to show the Old Testament teaching the Trinity, this really they can't handle this. Like, people are just, their minds blown at this. Just think of the Daniel Hikikachu debate, right? Like, when I started going through all these texts, he's like, oh, well, all of those are corrupted, right? So he wasn't even aware, because he doesn't know anything about the Old Testament. He wasn't even aware of how extensive, right, the Trinity is in the Old Testament. But you can see that Jordan's whole approach here, and I'm not faulting him for having this approach because it's everywhere. This is what everybody just assumes and thinks. Even I thought this for a long time, right? I thought for a long time, well, the Trinity that's not really an Old Testament thing. And I was a person that read the Old Testament a lot because I was in, Calvinist circles, and Calvinist circles tend to like the Old Testament a lot. But this is why this is so wrong-headed, is that if you come to the Old Testament thinking of it as a rabbinical Judaic text about Unitarianism, then you're going to end up with natural theology a la what the Vatican's Abu Dhabi Faith Center promotes and what Nostra Aetate promotes. And you're going to think, well, all the monotheistic faiths are Abrahamic. They all teach the same thing, right? But do you see how wrong-headed all this is? No. You've got the wrong reading of the text. The Old Testament is replete. I'm going to have to just do a whole new lecture, because the lecture that I did 4 or 5 years ago is pretty good. and it was I don't know, 3 hours of going through Old Testament texts with the Trinity. But since that time, and especially since reading a bunch of the Jewish scholars for the Hikikachu debate, there's all these other ones I missed. I mean, the Old Testament's gigantic, right? I mean, it's a lot of text. And I've been reading it for, I mean, not just the Old Testament, the Bible as a whole since 1998. So I put a lot of time into reading it, and even I miss stuff, right? The Bible is the amazing, mysterious book like that where you can read it and always see new things. Anyway, so it's just, I have to comment on this whole idea that another element of this debate that's missed is the assumption that when we say the word God, well, we're all talking about the same thing. We all believe in God. And then there's these other kind of controversial figures like Jesus. And Jesus is over here like Muhammad, right? But prior to Jesus and Muhammad, there was just this God, right? But if you read the book of John, how does Jesus consistently argue throughout the book of John? Especially from John 5 to John 9. That the whole Old Testament is about him. So do you see what's missing here in the natural theology elements here?
It was in the cultural practices, and in the agreement that people made with regards to those cultural practices, but it was also part and parcel of the intrapsychic structure that enables us to perceive the world as such. Now,
yeah, so every time I bring this up, Catholics tell me that the Old Testament has signs and traces of the Trinity. I'm well aware of that. That's not my point. My point is that the Roman Catholic approach, especially with Thomas Aquinas, is that the Old Testament teaches Unitarianism. And then the New Testament is what opens us up to the deity of Christ and the Trinity. And that is contrary to what you find in, especially the Church Fathers' polemics and apologetics. When Justin debates with Trypho, he's constantly trying to show the Trinity in the Old Testament. Does he do the Thomas Aquinas approach of saying that the Old Testament teaches a Unitarian God? No. So, every time I say this, Roman Catholics tell me, the Catechism says the Old Testament teaches Trinity. I know that. My point is that your doctrines contradict, not that you don't sometimes say good stuff or true things. So it can't be the case that the Old Testament teaches generic Unitarianism and that it teaches the Trinity. You understand those both can't be true at the same time?
the problem is, and I think this is the central place where we need to flesh out these ideas, is that you cannot view the world without an a priori structure. And that a priori structure has a dogmatic element.
Here's the transcendental categories. So now Jordan has gone from the dogmatic ideas, what I thought we were talking about Genesis and recorded dogmas. And now Jordan Peterson is saying that philosophical categories, Aristotle's categories, transcendental categories is essentially what he means, and that he just psychologizes them. He's saying they're dogmas. And he's in a sense, he's right, because they're presuppositions. They're not empirically demonstrable. You can't empirically demonstrate Aristotle's categories, which is true. Hence why we call them transcendental categories, transcendental arguments. So he's right here, and this is the dogmas that he's referring to. I wouldn't call them dogmas, but I mean, for us, dogmas refer to specific theological doctrines, like the Trinity or the Incarnation. But what he means here is correct.
Just say, well, let's get rid of the dogma, because you can't perceive the world without a structure.
It has an uninspected element.
So notice that's Kantian, right? And now it's not that I disagree with the phrase that you can't perceive the world without this presuppositional structure categories. But we are not Kantians in that we make that whole structure mental. It is not the mind that structures the external world. The mind learns the structure of the external world and has a structure in its own internal world. So structure is not a feature that's purely mental or psychological. It is an external structure and an internal structure, you see. And so I I do find the apologetic value in pointing out that there has to be structure, and you can argue from the internal structure if you wanted to. But if you make this Kantian such that the structure is only mental, you're not a Christian anymore, and you might as well be a solipsist. That's the end, because that's where that goes. That's where Kant's position leads to.
So if you're talking about just perceiving the world, yes, we have perceptual structure that allows for us to perceive the world, and we know that there are failure states.
Oh wait, Sam, is perceptual structure physical? Okay, so because perception is the mind's apprehension, I think even Descartes uses that terminology, of objects in the world. The mind's apprehension of an object is not physical matter. Plus, an apprehension or a perception involves a degree of active interpretation of the objects. And you can't reduce active interpretations of objects to gray matter. So he's actually, again, shooting his position. He's shooting himself in the foot.
We know, for instance, that we've evolved to perceive, in visual space, based on a literally neurological expectation that light sources will be from above, right? And so we know that we can produce visual illusions based on gaming that expectation, right? But that's not the same thing as a dogma subscribed to by some subset of humanity that is antithetical to another dogma subscribed to by another set of humanity that has nothing to do with underlying biology.
So this is kind of interesting because Sam Harris is saying that our perceptual framework isn't the same thing as religious dogma, which is true, but Peterson is making the point that just as much as you can't prove in an empirical way, something that you're calling God or theology, you also can't prove these categories, which is true, but I don't think Sam Harris gets that.
That's something that's changeable.
It's not so obvious.
No, but it's changeable in real time based on just conversations like this. We could have.
And this is why it's interesting. So if you want to see an easy example of where this is like a really simple level conversation and it's not very advanced, this is where transcendental argumentation would come into play, because transcendental argumentation is concerned with proving things that are not physical in a different way. And clearly different things are proven in different ways. The way that I would go about proving whether my wife loves me or whether there's, abstract objects like, Mandelbrot sets or something is not the same way that I go about proving whether there's crackers in the pantry. So not everything is proven in the same way. And so the way that we're going to go about proving things like immaterial invariant objects is not going to be the same as the way that we go about proving physical objects. And so this whole conversation right here could get up-leveled, to use Sam Harris's bizarre phrase, up-leveled, by understanding that maybe that's not a basic philosophical, that's more of like a mid-level philosophical point.
I get emails from people who can point to the paragraph where they lost their faith, right? Where in reading Richard Dawkins or hearing a debate between me and some theologian, where it's just a collision against rationality, which is so useful in every other context.
I know I have to keep pausing this, and it's kind of annoying. It's even annoying me to pause it this much, but it's just like this drives me nuts. All the assertions just flying out drive me crazy, because it's like he doesn't understand how much of what he's saying is absolutely inconsistent with his own presuppositions and his own worldview, right? And so, what did he just say? It was just driving me crazy.
I get emails from people.
Reasoning. He's like, I finally saw, reading Richard Dawkins, this is somebody emailing him, that my religious beliefs are contrary to reason. Interesting. So now we're going to go to the Court of Appeal of Reason, which, okay, let's do that. And if you saw, we had that TikTok goober, the Mormon TikTok guy, did this exact same thing, right? Which he was an agnostic Mormon, whatever that is. And he was like, I just go to the Court of Appeal of Reasoning. And I'm like, okay, I'll grant you that. Let's go to the court of appeal of reasoning. First of all, give me an account of what reason is. And his response was, let's go to the New Testament and I'll show you the problems. I was like, no, wait a minute. I'm going to grant you for the sake of argument that, let's say the New Testament is false. Okay, fine. It's full of errors, blah, blah, blah. What is your account for reason? Because that's for you now, according to you, the final court of appeal, right? Can you give me an account or an explanation for what reasoning is? What does that even mean, right? This total douchebag guy, right? What does that even mean? You tell me, because you're the one that's appealing to this as what you call they're calling it the final court of appeal here. Okay, so what is reason? If I'm going to not believe in a deity and theism and all that, and you want me to accept that there is this principle of rationality and reasoning, then I want an account for that. Because you're telling me not to believe in things that I can't see, touch, and feel because it's flying spaghetti monster superstition. Well, then guess what? Reasoning and universal reason is also in that exact same category of superstition. Unless you can give me some consistent, coherent account and grounding for reasoning.
People who can point to the paragraph where they lost their faith, right? Where in reading Richard Dawkins or hearing a debate between me and some theologian, where it's just a collision against rationality, which is so useful in every other context, suddenly proves its utility in this context where they think, well, okay, clearly I know the Muslims are wrong about the status of the Quran. Let me take that spirit of criticism in the internal space of my own culture, and what moves? Well, a dogmatic attachment to Christianity has to move by that same standard.
Well,
and it's possible to do that, and that's not a matter of getting into the brain and changing your perceptual apparatus that has.
Well, the distinction between different levels of what would you call it? Structure-related processing in the brain and the relationship to the underlying biology isn't clear. And it isn't clear when that's biological and when it isn't. So, your comments about our a priori perceptual structures notwithstanding, there's no clear line between what constitutes an instantiated, accurate biological perception and something that shades more into a cultural presupposition. So it's a gray area. Now, here, let me ask you a question. So
notice that he was afraid to go down the route of actually saying that these categories are actually in some way existing realities and real structures. So he didn't want to address the biological approach of Harris there by just saying, oh, well, it's all biological, right? He didn't want to admit that, but he also didn't want to say that the structures that we have for perceiving the world in our mind or whatever, he also didn't want to give them ontological existence, right? Because then he's in the domain of metaphysics again, and that's not where he wants to go. But you see how weak this is when at every point, and this is another critique I have of Peterson, is that it's the same with the Matt Dillahunty debate, where there's a point where he almost gets to making the transcendental argument, and then he just backs off and just doesn't do it. And it's like, you could seize the moment and make these ridiculous positions look ridiculous. And instead, he just sort of backs off and, again, in agnostic fashion and doesn't make the argument like he could. So, by the way, I want to remind you guys, too, if you want to support the show, you can please do so via Super Chats. The Super Chat function is in the chat right there. Use Streamlabs to send a Super Chat, and I will answer your question or your Super Chat as we move on. There is the link right there through Streamlabs, and I will be giving priority to those. So if you just put stuff in the chat, I'm not going to answer it. But if you give me a Streamlabs Super Chat, I will.
This is one of the things I've been thinking about. So this is designed to point out I'm not making the claim that the idea that we should ground values in facts is wrong. I'm not going to make that claim, although I think it's way more complicated than we've opened up so far. But I would say is I think relatively easily demonstrate a situation in which you cannot find the value from the facts. So let's say you own an antique. Okay, it's valuable. And you think, I'm going to take this antique apart and I'm going to find out where the value is. Good luck, man.
Well, it's not valuable in that sense.
Wait a second. So we need to know, so that's right, it's not valuable in that sense, because the value of the antique is a social agreement about its position in a hierarchy. It has nothing to do with the material substrate of the antique.
Well, sure.
Yeah, but not, you can't, it's not just sure. It's that you've made the claim already that you can derive values from facts. It's like, then what are you willing to accept as a fact?
These are facts about, again, so there are facts about, the facts exist in intersubjective space, right? So if I tell you, well, this glass, this isn't just an ordinary glass, I know it looks just like that one, but this is the glass that Elton John drank from in his last concert here,
yeah,
right?
Right.
So, what do you want to pay me for it, right?
Right.
Hold me closer, Tiny Sammy. Count the headlights on Atheist Highway. I don't even know the rest of that. What's the rest of the lyrics of that? Hold me closer, Tiny Harris. Count the headlights on the highway. Jordan Peterson's got a bad art. I don't know where I'm going with that. Anyway, how's the lyrics go? I was trying to fit it in with atheist lyrics, but I don't know.
It could be that, you're just the biggest Elton John fan ever, and it's worth quite a lot to you. Now,
that was actually a pretty good underhanded burn. I had to give Sam a point for that. That was a kind of a cool reverse Elton John neg there against Jordan Peterson. I actually like that.
it's a kind of evident. It's not value intrinsic to the glass, but
Right.
it is a.
Where's
It
the
could
value
be.
located?
Well,
It could be he could have got some of his gay vibes on the glass, which would then make it, gay valuable. So, I mean, remember, everything is reducible to matter. And so the gay is just different matter, different molecules, gay molecules, gay matter, right? You thought you had a bunch of gray matter in your head. No, you got gay matter up there. That's actually a pretty good Sam Harris argument. I like it. Right? Hold me closer, gay molecules. Oh, that doesn't work. Hold me closer, tiny dancer. Count the headlights on the highway. Gay matter.
The measure in the change this provokes in your experience, right? Just the idea. I mean, we value ideas as much as anything else, and that's hence the mad work done by religion, right? I mean, because these aren't facts on the ground. These are ideas that rule people's lives. I mean, people spend their whole life afraid of hell.
Okay,
right?
It seems to me that it's easier in some sense, rather than to relate the value of that. And I love the Elton John's glass example. I was going to use Elvis Presley's
it's here.
guitar.
I will sell it to you.
It's like, where in the guitar is the fact that it's Elvis Presley's
It's like
guitar?
where in the guitar is the
Nowhere
gay,
in the guitar.
It's like where in the glass is the gay molecules, It's like where's this, bucko? Right? Clean the condensation off the gay cup, bucko.
Well, what is it in? Where is it then? And the answer is, it's in the dominance hierarchy of values that's been socially constructed around the guitar. It's located in interpersonal space. And that...
Hold me closer, Tony Danza. Count the headlights, count the molecules on my tiny stash. How many molecules make up Tiny Mustache Man's tiny stash? Does anybody know? 35 molecules? Are they gay molecules? Who even knows? Do we know?
That location, so value is located in interpersonal space. And if you want to say, well, that's also a fact, it's like, okay, but we're starting to stretch
it's a fact
the
about the
dimension.
beliefs and desires and conscious states of all the people
Somebody
involved.
said, does
Okay,
Elton...
well,
That's the only place where it exists. That's the only
Fair
place where
enough.
Somebody said that Elton John have HIV? No. Elton John got the VIP posse. Y'all know what the y'all are too young. This audience don't even know about the VIP posse. Kick it. Yo, VIP. Kick it.
the idea of Elvis's guitar can show up.
Okay, well, I'm trying to figure out then, you see, because what seems to me to be happening, at least in part, is that we can stretch the domain of what constitutes a fact so that the domain of fact starts to incorporate the domain of values. But we do that with doing some damage to the domain of facts.
No,
Well,
not at all.
hang on.
Y'all in the chat, y'all make up my VIP posse. Y'all the HIVIP posse. HIVIP posse. Kick it. That's you, me, Jordan Peterson, and Elton John making up the HIVIP posse. Ninja, rap, ninja, rap. Do y'all even know? Y'all don't even know. Y'all don't even know what I'm referring to. Because y'all a bunch of kids up in there. Y'all a bunch of kids. Y'all a bunch of kids it's about to be your bedtime. Ooh, you about to hit curfew. Because y'all a bunch of kids don't even know what the VIP posse was. That was one of my first tapes, dog. I got that VIP posse right away when it came out. When it hit the freaking tape decks, when it hit the stores. I was over there. I was up in Target the day it came out. Yes, exactly. Halo Kills knows what's up. I was up in Target the day it came out, eating a bunch of slushies, getting diarrhea, corn dogs, waiting for it. Boom, it pops up. I go over there, get it. It's got that big old stupid white thing on. I can't even get it out of there. I was all about some Vanilla Ice, boy. He was my favorite. Do y'all remember that one song that he had where he sang the love song? 'Cause I love you. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Girl, every time I see you, you look so fine. Remember that? I want to wine and dine 'cause I love you. Do-do-do-do-do-do. You had a first CD. No, this was the first tape, boy. Actually, my first tape was Biz Markie picking boogers. For real. I'm so in love, girl. Girl, you know it's true. Ooh, 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 I love you. Yes, you know it's true. Ooh, 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 I love you. People were like, he can actually sing, dude. Anyway, we just lost 20 people. 20 people lost.
Don't just say no. This is really.
I'll say more.
This is really complicated because you see, part of what the postmodernists have done is that they've pushed away the domain of facts entirely, and they say, well, the only thing is that the only thing that actually exists is that this domain of intersubjective agreement, and they.
Well, you and I are on the same page with respect to postmodernism.
Right, but you have to give the devil his due as well.
Were they cheering postmodernism? This audience, man. This audience is ridiculous. This audience is as funny as all this stuff. I do have to give Sam Harris a point, though. That Elton John underhanded joke was pretty good. I like that. I'm impressed with that underhanded neg over there to JBP. You in that JBP posse. Kick it! Doom, 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 doom. Y'all remember my Jordan Peterson rap song? I did that live, by the way. Jordan Peterson. My freestyle, I did that live in LA. I think that's the one I messed up on. I did 5 songs live, visual performance in LA. Audio, visual, music performance live. Exactly.
They pointed out something, and what they pointed out is that it's not so easy to localize the structure that attributes to facts their value. It's not a simple thing.
Now, wait.
Yes.
You would surely agree that if we had Elvis Presley's guitar, that guitar would have a material impact on people. We could tell them, this is Elvis Presley's guitar. Some fraction of them would disbelieve it. Somebody might be able to establish it based on a picture or something like that. And the point is, it would have a value that would alter the behavior of people with respect to that object in a material way.
Yes, it would alter the behavior of the people.
So the value could be manifest in physical space.
Which part of it? The
We
behavior?
could detect it. We could figure out what the value of this guitar is.
So, like earlier, remember how their minds were blown over the question of delayed gratification and saving up to have something later? And the whole crowd was like, whoa, dude, whoa, mind blown, bro. Now their minds are blown over the idea of some objects having value as a social currency, right? Only because this is what we just call an artifact, right? Because so it's an artifact and has value because people see it as having value, and everybody's minds are blown. Whoa! But I don't see what this has to do with the question of categories of perception, right? Who brought up? Was it Peterson or Harris that brought up this Elton John gay juice glass or whatever they're trying to talk about?
On some intersection
Sure, we
between
could take a behaviorist approach, and we could see how much work people were willing to do to
but
make
also
contact with
we
the
can
guitar.
we can scan their brains and see what.
Well, I'm not so sure we can do that.
Well, clearly the brain is involved.
Hypothetically, we can do it, but practically, we're not so good at it. Because the MRI data, generally speaking, is junk.
Well, we can table that.
It's
that
not
will be
like
a
it'll
profoundly
junk.
controversial statement in MRI circles.
Fair enough.
I don't think we need it. We
don't need it, but
we
clearly-
know
let's go with the
that a
behavioral
market will
idea.
establish the
The
value of the
brain,
guitar.
as yet incompletely understood, is surely involved in the valuing of this object, right? And so if I tell you that this is, and again, we can take it out of intersubjective space because you could be in a value solitude with respect to any given object. So it could just be you could
You're
have
starting
a
to put me to
sentimental
sleep.
attachment to your watch that's worth exactly $25 because that's what you paid for it. But this is the watch that, this is your first watch or whatever it is, and you wouldn't sell it for any amount of money.
Right.
That's a measure of a behavioral measure of how much you value it. And if I told you, oh, well, sorry, I borrowed your watch and lost it, what the cascade of negative affect that I see on your face is correlated with something that's happening in your head, and the brain is involved, right? So the totality of that picture
what you're basically stating,
is the
as far
value.
as I can tell, is that there'd be a socio-cultural agreement as to the value of whatever this entity is, and that would find its mirror in the brain. And that's a non-controversial statement because all socio-cultural...
Jordan's going hand crazy. I mean, he's over there freaking pantomiming and coming up with his own, I don't know, underwater dance routine over here. He's just going nuts. He's got, snake fingers over there like Medusa on his hands going crazy this whole time. I just realized that he's over there freaking, he's doing turntables. DJ Peterson mixing it up over there.
Cultural phenomena that are experienced find their reflection in the brain. The fact that you can say that that's reflected in the brain, it's like,
Right, okay,
yes,
but
okay.
the
Dude, you
problem
said,
with-
hold up. You said who would pay to go see this? Bruh, do you know how much money people pay to go see JBP? They pay thousands of dollars to sit closer to JBP. I'm not joking. It's crazy. It's like, what? I mean, I don't know, man. Somebody get him some turntables. That'd be more interesting with his hands. His hands is going crazy, spurging out over there. Give him some turntables. Let's get DJ JBP up on a stage. JBP. Right?
Continually run into with
This is
religion.
getting boring.
Where you have a domain of so-called sacred values where people who are otherwise rational cease to be rational actors. So this is the reason why Israel and the Israelis and the Palestinians can't negotiate as though their problems could be solved by a real estate transaction is because they have irrational and irreconcilable claims upon land and buildings.
Do you think they're any
Actually,
more?
I don't
Do you
think
think
you know
they're any
that.
more irrational than the claim that glass is worth something more?
Well, no,
because
it's
near
like that.
Elton?
It's like that. But I'm
But
saying
that's not irrational by your own definition. You just said that was actually constituted a fact.
Well, no,
And so
it's a fact about people, right? So there are. This is okay.
Okay.
Should be a little careful here
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it gets confusing.
Yeah.
We can make objective claims about subjective experience, right? We use this word objective and subjective in different ways. We use it
Okay, but actually that was a good point that Peterson made about the value of the land in Palestine and the value of the Elton John sweat glass with the gay juice in there, right? The comparison was actually good given that Peterson pointed out the arbitrary nature of Harris's attributions of what values are, right? And since values are social constructs, then it's not actually incoherent to value a piece of land. And And that was actually a good point. And now he's trying to say that, well, there's a difference between purely subjective and objective. Okay.
Epistemological ways and ontological ways. And
Okay, give me just 1 sec to make sure I'm on the same page as you.
Well, so I can illustrate by way of example. If I say that that's just your subjective opinion, right? I'm denigrating. I'm saying that this is an expression of your bias. This is true for you, but it's not true out in the world, right? That's one way I can use the subjective objective distinction, and that's an epistemological way. Like you're ruled by bias. You're not thinking straight. I don't have to take your opinion seriously. That's subjective. I'm worried about objective facts. But people get confused. They think that objective facts only means the material world and what's really in this glass as a material object. No, we can be much more objective than that. We can make objective claims about the subjective experience of people like ourselves. I can make an infinite number of objective claims.
So he doesn't understand doing this and saying this is not the same thing as how you can give an account for doing and saying it, right? So Peterson is kind of lightly dancing around the question of justifying how you make these moves, and he doesn't understand this. He never grasps what it means to give a justified true belief, Gettier problem account for stuff, right? He just dances around it, acting as if he can just say, well, we can make universal claims about subjective experience. Yeah, but that's not answering the question of how you justify doing that. And I think a lot of people just don't even know what it means to justify a claim. They think that they mean it in a colloquial, common terminology sense of like, you're not justified in doing that, like you have a right, right? When we talk about this in a common parlance sense, it just means you don't have the right to do that, right? And when we say in a philosophical sense, we're talking about justification, epistemic justification. We don't mean in the common term sense of like, you don't have a right to do that. I do got a right. I'm justified whatever I want to do. That's how people think of it. And that's probably how Sam Harris thinks of it. I don't know, right? I mean, I've seen him really fumble and make big gaffes on pretty basic philosophical topics and questions. So I guess it's up for grabs whether he actually understands what that would mean or not.
About the experiences.
But you'll notice that this is common in all the atheists, right? I mean, pretty much all of them, except for maybe a few of the PhD professors. They never know what you mean by justification and, giving an epistemic grounded account. They almost always think that means telling a story. Right, or telling the origins of it.
Well, we had an evolutionary process by which we adapted to figure out how to survive.
No, that's not a justification. That's a story. You're telling me a story of how something arose. And even if that's how it arose, it would have nothing to do with whether it's justified. Because there might be all kinds of things that arise that are irrational or that don't make any sense. So the fact that it arose as an evolutionary adaptation to whatever has nothing to do with whether it actually is true or false. Because much of these people's own account of evolution is that there's a bunch of junk DNA, there's a bunch of mutations, there's a bunch of things that happen that are worthless and don't benefit the species. So the mere fact that you call it a evolutionary adaptation has nothing to do whatsoever with epistemic justification. It just shows that they don't know the difference between telling a story of an origin, making up a story to make it sound like it makes sense. And they love this, right? This is all their dumb examples of space worlds with computers and no human minds and all this bullshit what they just make up out of their head. They don't understand. They actually think fan fiction is a thought experiment. Thought experiments are not your atheist Isaac Asimov like sci-fi fantasies. That's not what a thought experiment is. Not how creative can I be in making up crap to make my made-up worldview work. That's not what a thought experiment is. A thought experiment is a way to demonstrate something that's logical or illogical, right? Like any possible world, right? Like, you can't deny the law of non-contradiction in any possible world, okay? It's not saying that there's a world where there's a bunch of let's imagine a world where there's only a bunch of gay Elton Johns that live on a planet, and they work for a big gay supercomputer that lives in the center of the Earth, and it's a giant gay Earth, and like we wouldn't need God on that planet because look, it's functioning, and everybody's got their own gay sweat juice that they can drink. So it's a workable planet, no God needed. Right? That's what they think. That's what they think a thought experiment is. It's like getting creative with, Elton John fan fiction or some shit, right? That's not what a thought experiment is. It has to do with logic, dummy.
The example I always use, but I just happen to love it. What was JFK thinking the moment he got shot, right? Now that's it. We don't know, so we'll never get the data, right? So the truth or falseness of what I'm about to say can't be predicated on actually getting access to the data because he's not around and his brain's not around to scan. But you and I both know an infinite number of things he wasn't thinking about. We can make an objective claim about his subjectivity. I know he wasn't thinking, well, I hope Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris work it out on stage that night. Right? And an infinite number of things like that. He was thinking something, he was experiencing something, but we don't know what it is. So when I'm talking...
Once again, we see that this debate discussion never fails to entertain with the wild out there examples. What was JFK thinking when the bullet hit him? We know that it wasn't, what's Jordan Peterson up to? I don't think that's likely, but I don't know how in Sam Harris's worldview he actually thinks he could demonstrate that. And by the way, you can't scan a brain to know what somebody was thinking. Unless there's some amazing DARPA tech that Sam Harris knows about that I don't know about. Scanning a brain doesn't tell you what people thought 50, 60 years ago or whatever. This is a really bizarre example. So it's sort of like, Caesar wasn't thinking about Lickamaid, was he? No. See? Objective truth right there. But actually, even though it sounds ridiculous, in Sam Harris's worldview, he couldn't actually demonstrate that. Because in other words, in a materialist empiricist paradigm, he's going to have to give empirical proof for these kinds of claims. Do you see that? Now, I'm not an empiricist, so that wouldn't really be a problem for my worldview to say that, it's pretty much impossible that Caesar, when he crossed the Rubicon, was thinking about Lickamaid candy, right? Or was thinking about drinking Elton John sweat juice. But I'm in a much better position to explain why that's the case, being that I'm not an empiricist materialist. Whereas Sam Harris is in no position to actually argue that that's the case. So even though it sounds on the surface like he can make a good argument here that there's all kinds of truth claims that he could make, it's not really whether you can make those claims, it's whether on your worldview and in your paradigm you could justify those claims. And by the way, actually, Leibniz has a great argument to actually refute Sam Harris there. And it's called Leibniz's argument from eternality of truth. And so Leibniz says this, makes this argument. He says, well, I can prove to you that you can't reduce the truthfulness of an event or the truthfulness of a proposition to matter or to an instance of history. He says, because let's say, so Caesar crossed the Rubicon, right? Isn't it always true now that it's, even if after it's happened, right? It will always be the case that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, right? Now, is the truthfulness of the proposition that Caesar crossed the Rubicon contained in the event of Caesar crossing the Rubicon? No. Caesar crossing the Rubicon was an event at one place in one time. And yet, outside of that event, throughout all space and all time afterwards, it is the case that Caesar crossed the Rubicon. So the eternality of truth cannot be reduced to the material phenomena of the event. And so Leibniz's argument for the eternality of truth also refutes this bizarre claim bizarre, unjustified claim, I should say, because the claim itself actually isn't that bizarre. What Sam Harris is saying that, okay, yes, JFK, when the bullet hit him, he was not thinking of Elton John's Sweat Juice. But there's not actually a way in the worldview that Sam Harris says to ever demonstrate any kind of proposition or any kind of truthfulness like that, given that he's a reductionist materialist, you see.
About this domain of value. I'm saying that it exists in this landscape of actual and possible conscious experience for human beings and any other system like us that can experience this range of suffering and happiness.
Well, okay, so, and partly what I'm trying to do is to actually determine what that structure is. Like, so
well, in our case, it's certainly connected to the evolved structure of our brain.
Yeah, but I want to go way deeper into the brain.
It's augmented by everything else we do.
I want to go way deeper into the idea than it's connected with brain states, because it's definitely connected with brain states. The question is, at least in part, how, and what does that mean? And I think that the neuroscience has progressed far enough so that we can do quite a good job of this. And so, what I want to return to one thing, and maybe I'll outline a little bit of this. And when you talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you said that was irrational. And so, look, fair enough. People have been locked with their hands around each other's necks there for 3,000 years. But there's a problem there. And the problem is that people are looking at the landscape from a contextualized perspective, right? It's not just a piece of land. It's their piece of land. It's like your house or maybe your favorite shirt. It's like, well, you say, well, I have a favorite shirt. It's like, well,
I'm convinced now Jordan Peterson's over there doing Jedi mind tricks. That's what he's doing with his hands. I've been trying to figure out, is he DJing over there? Has he got some turntables, tiny turntables? No, he's doing Jedi mind tricks. You don't need to see my justification. You don't need to see my arguments. Move along, right? He's doing some Obi-Wan over there. That's what he's up to.
There's nothing inherent in the shirt that makes it your favorite. No, it's a subjective judgment. It's like, well, then is that a fact? Well, yes, it's a fact. It's a fact about subjective judgment. It's okay. Well, the Israeli claim on the land and the Palestinian claim on the land is a subjective judgment that's a fact. It's like, so how is it irrational?
Because it is the true analogy here, the complete analogy is rather like we're about to fight over Elton John's glass, and Elton John was never here. Right.
Well,
mind blown, right? Mind blown. This whole time we thought that hot, sweaty glass of water over there that was looking so good, right? That hot, sweaty gay water over there sweating, looking all luscious. Elton John wasn't even here, dude. Likewise, God wasn't even over in Palestine, bro. You just got fooled, dude. You got duped. Sam Harris just blew my mind, bro.
So I'm not saying so. It clearly still matters to us in our misapprehension of our situation. We still really care, and these are objectively true claims about the level of at which we value things, and hence the impasse.
Well,
but it matters.
By the way, this would be. I'm surprised that maybe Jordan Peterson just wasn't thinking about it, but I mean that's really a false analogy, right? Because humans value certain artifacts, that therefore all value is equated to the value of an artifact, right? So I would first of all point out that that's a false analogy, although the crowd was really wowed by that one, right? I mean, this low IQ crowd, which we've seen has been a struggle to listen to, with their hooting and their hollering and their applause lights going off after every comment. I think that, again, I'll give Sam Harris a point, another point here. His Elton John joke was pretty good earlier on, but I'll give him a point here for at least good rhetoric. But this argument isn't as good as it might appear on the surface, because it hinges on the equivalence between a religious conflict or a historical conflict being the same as the conflict between over subjective value. So because some objects have subjective value, we wouldn't therefore conclude that all objects therefore are purely subjective in value. This would be a parts whole fallacy, right? Now, FDA is in the audience. Shout out to Patristic Faith. Wouldn't that be a parts whole fallacy? I mean, to claim that because some objects derive their value as artifacts in a human society, to then therefore move to all objects are identical then in the same way as deriving their value as purely human social constructs or human relative objects. The problem would be, though, that it still rests on the assumption that God doesn't exist. And that's actually the thing that's in question, right? So for the analogy to work, God has to not exist in the same way that he's saying that Elton John didn't actually drink from this glass. But that's the thing that's in question, is whether God exists. So let's see how Jordan Peterson replies to this, at least rhetorically good riposte from Scam Harris.
I think that's counterproductively dismissive. Like you could say, well,
It's really not. When you look at the specific claims, it's really not.
Look, you took the contextual interpretation to its absolute extreme. You said, well, there's multiple reasons why different people who occupy the same piece of land are going to feel about it in different ways.
Sure.
Okay, and
most of those reasons are amenable to some kind of rational compromise.
Well,
I mean, there's actually there's studies on this. I mean, there's studies done by people who I disagree with.
When you say the word rational in that context, you're using it as a black box that contains.
Right, so some people in the audience are now beginning to question the existence of Elton John, right, which is Atheism, right? So if you don't believe in Elton John, you're an atheist. And I'm starting to doubt whether, he wasn't there, slobbering and sweating on that sweaty glass. So I'm actually starting to become an atheist. I don't think there is an Elton John. And by the way, if there was an equivalence between the non-existence of God in Palestine and the non-existence, I'm an atheist now. Are you? Exactly. Atheist. Not an atheist, an atheist.
The concept, proper way of thinking about it. It's like it's not so obvious in most situations what the rational approach is.
Well,
Otherwise, life would be very,
I have
very
an obvious
simple.
one. I have an obvious one here, and that's that whatever the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews think they're getting from their attachment to their dogmatic and irreconcilable religious worldviews can be gotten just as well by a deeper understanding of our universal and non-culturally bound capacity for ethical experience.
Yes, thank you, FDA. That could be the unholy trinity of three fallacies. Fallacy of composition, parts whole. Fallacy of hasty generalization. Well, some objects derive their value only from cultural construction, and so therefore all objects are derived as cultural constructs. And begging the question, because if God's existence is a thing that's in question, then the analogy already rests on the non-existence of God. Exactly.
Spiritual experience, community building, and we can touch
that
space.
What's that grounded in?
We can touch that space it's almost like the status quo is. It's almost like you're content to live in a world, or at least you're content not to judge.
Step into Wix Studio, where creative freedom meets absolute efficiency.
Oh, I got it. Hold me closer, spaghetti monster. Count the droplets on the gay juice. She's a lady, she's a mancer. That's a mancer, get it? A man dancer, a mancer? I don't know. I feel like I'm missing the obvious lyrics here. Hold me closer, tiny Sammy. Hold me closer, Jordan Peterson. Count the what? What should we be counting? I don't know. Hold me closer, necromancer. Anyway.
A world where fans of rival soccer teams or baseball teams regularly kill one another over their fandom, right? Like what if that were the status quo? It's like it's been this way for thousands of years.
Exactly. If Elton John exists, why bad thing happened? Boom. We're all Eltheists tonight. We just won. We just got the transcendental argument. Transcendental argument. Transcendental argument. Transcendental argument. The transcendental argument. That's it. Transcendental argument. To make you an Eltheist. Rocket Man. I'm trying to think of other Elton. I don't like Elton John, so Tiny Dancer's like the only one I know. Count the fallacy. No, it's got to be count the errors on the. I don't know.
There must be a reason for it.
Look,
people
I'm
really
not
like
trying
sports.
I'm not trying to justify the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
No, but
I'm
but
saying that
we
casual
shouldn't be too
attempts
quick to judge the sanctity of their differences of opinion.
Okay, but wait a minute, Sam. There, you made a claim. Like your claim was that if the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims would just stop their stupidity and adopt this universal ethic, then everything would be okay. It's like, okay, what's the basis for the universal ethic? Like that's such.
That's a
you have this
no one's
universal
going.
ethic. It's
No
like,
one's
what is
going in
it?
search of that. The truth is, I mean, that's an interesting problem for philosophers and for scientists. That's not actually.
Your claim was that if the Christians and the
here we
Jews
go.
and the Muslims would just stop their stupidity and
we go.
adopt this universal ethic, then everything would be okay. It's like, okay, what's the basis for the universal ethic?
Yes,
Like,
there we go.
that's
Finally, after 1 hour and 10 minutes, we got a clear, targeted torpedo argument. Jordan Peterson. Finally. It only took 1 hour and 10 minutes. And this was he could have asked this question like a freaking hour ago. This is the question. Finally. Bro, come on. Dang, dude. We finally got it. And what will Sam's answer be? What will Sam's answer? Finally. Now we got to hear. Let's pay attention. I'm all distracted. I'm not even listening to them jibber jabber. I almost missed the final argument after an hour of this because I'm trying to think up Elton John lyrics because I'm more entranced and interested in the Elton John jokes than I am the rest of this conversation. Finally, though, in the midst of the jokes, we get the torpedoing.
That's a
You have this
no one's
universal
going.
ethic. It's
No
like,
one's
what is
going in
it?
search of that. The truth is, I mean, that's an interesting problem for philosophers and for
Ah,
scientists.
the great
That's
deflection.
Not actually, where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem, which my worldview can't deal with. And I guess philosophers can talk and think about it. But you know what? It's just not where the rubber meets the road. Oh, so the greatest challenge argument against my position, I just hand wave it. It's not, you know what? Whatever.
People living their lives well. I mean, this is analogous to me.
Sure
like
it is.
Right, so I don't have to give an account for my universal ethic. I just made a universal claim about ethics. I don't have to give an account for it. And if you ask me to give an account for it, you know what? This is just what philosophers do, and they're annoying. Oh, but by the way, don't you have a philosophy degree or something, Sam? I thought you had a claim to be into philosophy at undergrad or something, right?
Associated in your book with the difference between the bad and
no,
the good
no,
life.
I really care about all of it.
Great point, Jordan. If this is what's in the book, then great for calling him out. Finally, right? This is what's in your book. This is how you distinguish between well-being and a good life versus bad being and a bad life. Oh, and there's no justification for it. Leave that to the philosophers. So you see how, hopefully, people with some degree of common sense and rationality, the very thing that Sam Harris is always appealing to, when the rubber meets the road, his own phrase, I don't have any argument for that. I don't consider the question of how I give an account for my universal claims a valid question for me. How can people not see through that? That's intellectual chicanery. The man is a mountebank. Tomfoolery, fraudery of the highest degree.
this, and my job as a philosopher, as a moral philosopher in that
Well,
case, is to make the best.
Wait. I thought he just said that's a question for philosophers. And now he's like, but my job as a moral philosopher. What? This dude was a fraud back then. People are like, it's only taken now after a bunch of coof nonsense, right? With him saying a bunch of crazy stuff. Where they're like starting to realize, hey, wait a minute. Sounds like maybe Sam Harris is not actually that rational. Bro, he never was. Where was y'all at, dummies? Remember 5-6 years ago when we were saying he was not rational? And what was a lot of the YouTube atheist crowd back then? You're a dumb theist, spaghetti monster. Hold me closer, spaghetti monster. Count the meatballs on my face. She's a lady, she's a spaghetti monster without a gender. I don't even, what's even another Elton John song? I don't even know. I can't keep singing that one. Rocket Man. How's that go? I don't listen to Elton John. I remember that one song he sang with that other straight dude, George Michael. Remember him? Y'all remember George Michael? Steve Holt. Not that George Michael. How does the song go? Zero. Rocket Man. Da, 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 da. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. He was singing about this debate, wasn't he? Right? And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. Elton John prophesying. He was prophesying about this debate. Right? Because the question is, when is this debate going to get anywhere? And Elton John was up there singing that song, and I think it's going to be a long, long time. Now I'm starting to be, guys, Elton John was a prophet. He predicted this debate. So I'm no longer an Eltheist. I have reconverted back to Eltonism, to being a non-Eltheist. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. Anyway, what's another Elton John song? Rocket Man, Tiny Dancer. That's the only ones I know. What's that one? Don't let the sun go down on me. That's the one with the other heterosexual man, George Michael. Remember that? Don't let the sun go down on me. That sounds like, but I'm not gonna make that joke. There's a really dirty gay joke in there. I'm not gonna make it. Right.
Case I can for these ideas, but the truth is, I mean, it is analogous to when you get into a debate with a Christian fundamentalist in the state.
Oh, he's gonna. Oh, by the way, I just thought George Michael. He was singing about Jordan Peterson. Did y'all know that? Did y'all know that George Michael sang about Jordan Peterson? I will be your father figure. Put your tiny hands in mine. I will be your preacher, teacher. Anything you have in mind. Get it? Because Jordan Peterson's a father figure to all the young men out there. Get it? Get it?
Very often, this person will pretend to care about cosmology or evolution as though it's the most important thing in the world, as though you...
Okay, so when you debate a fundamentalist, they will pretend to care about evolution. Okay, let's hear this. This is a genius argument. Where's it going?
You can't get out of bed in the morning and figure out how to treat your friends and family well unless you figure out what happened before the Big Bang, right? No one really lives their lives that way.
Okay, so the argument is that I don't need to know abstract, unknowable questions. Actually, what he's saying is when they ask hard questions of my position, like can I give an account for the universal ethic? He's equating that to ridiculous, unanswerable questions that have nothing to do with how to live a good life. Oh, but it does have everything to do with how to live a good life. Because if the world was not created then there's not a basis for right and wrong. And he knows, I think, enough to know that, right? And so this is 100% classic deflection.
That way. And yet we have convinced ourselves that this is a sensible way of talking about the conflict between religion and science.
So hold on.
But-
I
yeah.
think you have arrived at the core of your conflict right here, and I actually hear you both loud and clear. Your point is that if the people faced with the question were to, start with a fresh sheet of paper, look at the Middle East, they could arrive at a compromise that they as individuals might find put them way ahead, and it was more profitable than the situation that they are continually finding themselves in.
Yeah.
And that might be the case. On the other hand, the reason that they don't is that historically those who have been outcompeted by those who haven't. So the point is, the universe and the fact that it refuses to solve that conflict is telling us that there is some reason that people who take that prospect
Yeah, I agree. What would you do? What would y'all do if all three of them, in the midst of this old 5-year-old live video, if they all broke the fourth wall and turned to the screen and said, "Jay Dyer, would you like to come on stage?" That would blow your minds, wouldn't it? I would think it's some kind of like a deep fake hack or something, right? If they broke the fourth wall.
seriously are not.
And by the way, if that happened, I would get up there and start singing Elton John songs because I would just go insane, right? That would break my mind and it would break my heart, right? It would be a dream come true to be on stage with the greatest minds of our time.
Actually correct in some at least metaphorical way. So in other words, what is it to have a sentimental attachment to some piece of territory somewhere? That sounds completely irrational. On the other hand, that sentimental attachment may result in you continuing for 500 or 1,000 or 2,000.
Wait a minute. Having a sentimental attachment to a place is completely irrational. I mean, does anybody on the stage like their house and their land? I mean, for pretty much all of humanity's existence, they've handed down their land to their children, their offspring, when they were able to keep their land. So, no, I don't think that's irrational at all. This is silly.
Years, whereas if you surrendered it because it was irrational, you might go extinct. Now, should you care that your lineage is going to go extinct? Maybe, arguably not. On the other hand, it's hard to imagine that what you're saying is so thoroughly grounded that it can justify causing people to alter their perspective on value in such a way that it might actually drive them extinct. It's not.
Well, interesting because, as we saw in yesterday's discussion, a lot of the atheists felt justified in getting rid of tens of millions of people in the last century. So this idea that the atheist worldview is immune to the idea of warfare and genocide and getting rid of people is complete baloney.
Well,
Clearly that's a good
clearly,
thing.
maybe secularism. We're talking about the fringe here. We're talking about when you're talking about, in this case, the Israeli settlers and the Palestinian terrorists, right? Like we should all breathe a sigh of relief that kind of passion and attachment to land doesn't characterize most of humanity.
It does if you're trying to defend your house.
So,
but that's
can I
kind of a
turn
different
that
topic.
back on
Yes.
Jordan? Because I think this is where the crux of it is.
Well,
so if we
yes.
follow the idea that this is actually that the seemingly sentimental and irrational attachment to the piece of land is some sort of meta-rationality, which sounds like your perspective, then we are now confronted with the question of, all right, if it is an evolved kind of meta-rationality that is being manifest in stories that cause people to behave in ways that Sam sees as clearly irrational, then we are stuck with the naturalistic fallacy, which is to say, so for those who don't know, the naturalistic fallacy says that just because something is doesn't mean it ought, right? The fact that selection favors something doesn't make it good.
Here we are finally, hour and 13, and Brett Weinstein has spoke up with the argument. And we've seen Sam Harris continually flounder at the basics of the is-ought. We've already done multiple videos on this, and the video that we did analyzing his floundering on the is-ought was years after this video. So if he didn't get it years after this, I sure as hell can tell you that he didn't get it before that.
Aztecs sacrificed their enemies. It is good for continuing Aztecness, but it may not be good in some absolute moral sense. So here's the question for you. You're arguing for, I think, an evolutionarily very viable explanation for religious belief and dogma, but aren't you stuck with the downside of it, where much of what is encoded in that way may actually
Yeah, by the way, this might actually also point out the flaw in Jordan Peterson's evolutionary account of religion.
be abhorrent
Yes.
morally and consciously?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
No doubt about it.
what do we do about
Well,
that?
this is exactly
Do you have
why.
a sorting algorithm?
Yes.
What is
So I'm
it?
trying to get to it.
Okay.
Okay, so this is actually why I asked Sam this question. It wasn't an attack. It's like, okay, so look, people have these belief systems, Christian, Muslim, Jew, we'll say for that, and you're saying abandon those, let's say, and move towards this transcendent rationality. It's like, okay, two problems. It's not so easy to abandon a belief system because you end up in the morally relativist nihilist pit, and that's a problem.
One doesn't have to. And
Well,
many people don't.
people tend to, and so it's a
Well, no,
very
I mean,
major problem.
It's just not. I mean,
No, they don't have to. Look,
That's wait.
Sam,
That's
they-
an empirical
right.
claim that
They
we'd
don't-
have to find out whether that's
They-
true.
well, they
but
don't-
there's
they
a lot
don't-
of evidence against that.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of evidence for it too, but it's beside the point to some degree because that isn't something that I want to quibble about. Perhaps there are transitional paths, and sometimes people find a collapse of their faith actually freeing. It's certainly the case that many of the people who are happy about what you're doing have found exactly that in what you've been saying, and more power to you. And so I'm not willing to dispute that. But what you said was, okay, here's these belief systems that are ancient and complex, and we can step outside of them, and there's this transcendent rationality that we could all aspire to that would solve the problems. It's like, okay.
It's like, okay,
So Jordan Peterson's like Tom Coombe in Minority Report, right? He's got maybe he's got like super awesome Google contacts on, and he's like playing with some kind of like high IQ like supercomputer that he can see in front of him, right? Like it's like Minority Report. Maybe that's what's going on because he's going finger crazy, boy.
What is it?
Well,
What is it exactly?
It is, at a minimum, to value all of the variables that conspire to make the one life we know we have
Okay, you
worth
can't
living.
value all those variables.
Well, no, we're doing it right. We do it every day in how we organize
No, we
ourselves
don't,
in
because
society.
we apply an a priori framework to the variables to reduce them to a tiny subset that we can manage. And it's the nature of that a priori framework that we haven't.
This, I guarantee you, 95% of this audience does not know what Jordan Peterson's talking about with an a priori framework, which he's talking about the presuppositional categories that make experience intelligible. I don't even think Sam Harris knows what that is, right? Because I just don't think he's that sophisticated. But, I mean, and if the audience doesn't know, what are they actually cheering on here, right? Like, this audience has been funny the whole time, right? With their hooting and hollering and, whoa, yeah! When it's bizarre comments that don't even legitimize a hooting and a hollering, right? So I'm just wondering, like, do they even know what he's talking about with a priori categories? I don't think they do. So they're just all mesmerized by word salad. And I'm not saying it actually is word salad because I know what he's talking about. But the funny thing is that to the atheists, when you bring up these terms, they always say you're engaging in word salad, right? You talk about a priori category. What's the word salad? What's the word salad? Transcendental categories, the word salad. So because they don't know what a word means, they equate it to word salad, right? So I'm just still wondering, what is this audience cheering on if they understand what probably, you think they understand 30% of this conversation?
Being able to have a discussion about. We have an a priori framework that narrows our perception to almost nothing. It's built into us. It's partly socially constructed. It has a deep neurological substrate. And we actually understand how it emerges to a large degree. And the thing is that.
But I don't think that's actually our difference. I mean, so the a priori framework operates in many different spaces, which again we can't necessarily analyze, but it makes it no less true. So if you put your hand on a hot.
Okay, so again, he thinks that a priori categories of perception are raw sense data. right? And when they had the same discussion last year on Peterson's podcast, he says the exact same thing. When I put my hand on the stove, I pull it away because it's hot.
Stove, you will immediately feel a very good reason. In fact,
Okay, that's nothing to do with what the transcendental categories that make perception intelligible are. He doesn't even understand what the issue is.
Arguably good reason to remove it, right? And it doesn't require moral philosophy to get you there. You don't need to inspect your a priori framework. You just have to feel, holy shit, this is the worst thing I've ever felt, right? And there's so many.
Wait, so somebody's in the audience, and you're saying that you were at this event, and you're saying that I was a part of this audience. Wait, online. Some of the people in the audience, not online, dude. The people in the audience are like hooting and hollering and like going nuts, like they're at a freaking Beatles concert, like a 16-year-old girl with tingles going up their leg at a Beatles concert. Over here, like hooting and hollering, yeah! And I'm like, do they even know what's being discussed? As we saw in last night's stream.
Moments like that in life that we understand.
What if you're trying to rescue your child from a fire?
Well, exactly. Then you have some other goal, right?
Yes,
that
you
is going to
certainly do.
cause you to brave that suffering, right?
Yes.
But again, trying to rescue your child from a fire is pretty close to the hot stove in not needing to be analyzed, right? The imperative to rescue it becomes harder when you have to rescue someone else's child from a fire, and
So this has nothing to do with the status of transcendental categories of the of possible intelligibility of perception. This has nothing to do with that. He's just resorting to, well, we have sense data. We have raw sense data. And you don't need to analyze a priori categories of perception to know that hot hurts you. Nothing to do with, okay, but it's not even in question. What does that have to do with the issue of transcendental categories of perception? Nothing.
And you're worried about orphaning your child who's standing next to you on the sidewalk, right? Then we get into the domain of moral philosophy, and then you can say, well, you know, how much do each of us owe the children of other people, right? How much should I risk my life and risk orphaning my child to rescue your child? That's when things get interesting in a philosophy seminar, and that's where people begin to hesitate. People begin to, we are biased toward protecting ourselves, protecting our kin, protecting our friends, and only then do we begin to extend the circle. And again, but this is not a mystery where we want to go here. We want to extend the circle more and more and build institutions and societies that implement our best selves at our best moments more and more. It makes it more effortless to be good in the world. We want good incentives.
Can we take your example seriously?
None of that had anything to do with the questions that Jordan Peterson raised. So finally it took us, hour and a half to get an actual argument. And Sam Harris said absolutely nothing. All right, so I think that's a good bit of part 3 or part 2. This one is really getting bottom of the barrel. Should we move on to part 3? Let's see if this goes anywhere.
It's not a matter of meaning. It's not a matter of purpose. And it's not a matter of ground.
Oh, this sounds... Meaning, purpose, and grounding. This actually sounds interesting. So let's see where Harris goes here.
Objective observation of the ground.
If it's a statement of faith and it's in the value domain, how is it derivable from facts?
Okay, so...
Yeah, exactly. So this is the is-ought question. And remember, we covered Jordan Peterson asking Sam Harris the same questions 6-8 months ago. So let's see how Sam Harris answers the is-ought question 5-6 years ago.
We've arrived at the point where we have to decide whether to go to Q&A or to continue the discussion. While you all are thinking about that, I would like to level a challenge to each of you, and then I will poll the audience and see what they think about Q&A. Okay, so Jordan is arguing to you that you cannot ground the values that would undergird the modality of increasing well-being in anything factual. And you are arguing in response that...
Not without
Correct.
an intermediary structure.
Let me just argue in response.
Hold on a second.
Not without an intermediary structure.
What I've heard you argue is something that I agree with, which is that you can ground many things in a nearly objective observation of the universe, but it doesn't say anything about the value part of the equation. And in fact, I think, having thought about the question from an evolutionary point of view, that in order to do what you're talking about, to increase well-being, you are going to have to accept that that is going to leave you with an arbitrary grounding. There is no absolute grounding
Correct.
for it. And you're going
Finally, hour and a half. We're still hitting at the main point.
just simply accept that it's going to make you arbitrary, that you are in fact going to have to do inconsistent things like decide to honor the love of a mother for her child and dishonor the love of country that causes one population to gas another population. That's inconsistent, and that we need to embrace that kind of inconsistency.
I mean, it's just a different, I don't think that we even have the grounding problem. I think it's a pseudo problem.
But you just said
we have, we, no,
Yeah. So at least Jordan Peterson is calling out some of this bullshit sophistry from Sam Harris here, right? And this is a classic move, just to say it's not a problem. It's a pseudo problem. Even though he just earlier said it's a problem that philosophers have. It's not a real problem. And then he says a minute later, by the way, I'm a moral philosopher. Yeah, so you should deal with this problem, bro.
Somewhere.
we have a navigation. So the way it's grounded is the acknowledgement that what we have is, I mean, it's analogous to what people do with the notion of meaning in life. Like, what's the meaning of life? How do you find meaning in life? Or what's the purpose of life?
So I'm going to say that he doesn't know what grounding means. Because, and maybe you could say the same thing to Jordan Peterson, that he doesn't even know what grounding means. He's on the right track. Peterson is. This is exactly where I would go with Sam Harris in a debate. So he is correctly going down the route of what does it mean to ground, but I'm afraid, you know what I mean? Like, I'm scared. I don't think Jordan Peterson would know what it means to ground in the epistemic sense, right? Because then we're getting a little too philosophically dense, even though he's using a priori categories, which is pretty heavy philosophy. But he is asking the right question. I just hope that he knows what it means to justify a claim, because that's what we mean by grounding. But I don't think Sam Harris knows what it means. I think Sam Harris thinks, like most people do, that when you ask for grounding for a claim, that just means you have no right to make that claim. You have no grounds. You have no right. I do have a right. I am justified in making a claim. I have a right, like everybody else has rights. That's not what it means, dummy. It's not have anything to do with your rights. It means justification in an epistemic sense, giving reasons for why that belief is the case. And as most atheists don't know when it comes to philosophy, they just think it's telling a story. Telling a convincing story is what it means to ground or justify something.
These are bad questions. These are questions that, when you pose them, they seem to demand...
Bad questions.
I think it's a pseudo problem. I think
it's a pseudo problem for his atheist, idiotic position. Did you hear what he just said? This is amazing.
But you just said you need to put your stuff in somewhere.
We have a navigation. So the way it's grounded is the acknowledgement that what we have is, I mean, it's analogous to what people do with the notion of meaning in life. Like, what's the meaning of life? How do you find meaning in life? Or what's the purpose of life? These are bad questions.
There we go. We're back to the chart. Any of the questions that I don't like are bad questions. But wait a minute, good and bad are value judgments. And this whole discussion was, how do we ground our value judgments for well-being? And the answer is, I don't answer the questions that are bad questions, such as, how do I ground it? That's a bad question. Who would fall for this? I mean, if you fell for this, you're an idiot. There's just no other ways around it. If you ask for the purpose and meaning of life and for the grounding of universal claims, which is a basic philosophical question. I mean, anybody who takes an epistemology 101 course will deal with this question. Oh, that's a bad question. This is so ridiculous. It's the equivalent of Neil deGrasse McTyson saying, "Oh, don't study philosophy. Philosophy's stupid. Don't study it. Well, philosophy's worthless." It's only worthless because you can't answer the questions that philosophy asks you. If philosophy asks you not random, obscure questions, but very basic questions, like, why ought we believe your universal moral claims, Sam? That's a bad question. This is so dumb.
Questions that, when you pose them, they seem to demand, they suggest a space in which an answer must be put, but it's just...
But you put an answer there.
No,
Yeah, exactly. You put the answer there, and we're asking for why we should believe that. Duh. And he's like, why are you trying to demand something there? It's because it's your assertion. Why ought we believe it? The very thing you would say of a theist. Why ought we believe in your theism, theist? Well, here's our answers, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, why ought we believe in your universal secular humanist ethic? That's a bad question. Don't ask me that.
You said that people should work towards the good.
yes, there's a different way of framing it.
The
which
good.
is, what we have here is an opportunity. It's not a matter of meaning. It's not a matter of purpose. And it's not a matter of grounding.
Oh,
We are
yeah.
in a circumstance.
Yeah, don't ask me any of the questions that my position rests on. Don't ask me about telos, purpose, meaning, and epistemic justification for my epistemic claims. Don't ask me that. Don't ask me those questions. Those are bad questions. This is so stupid. Anybody with medium level IQ should be able to see this. This is not grad level questions. This is like, again, these are the questions you would have in philosophy 101, 102.
Where we have consciousness and its contents in every moment, and all of this is the lights are on.
Oh, so just a bunch of metaphysical gibberish assertions. We have consciousness and content in every, what do you say, event of consciousness? I mean, just gibberish. Again, just reasserting. This is just like Matt Dillahunty. This is Dillahunty level gibberish.
And they're on for reasons that we dimly understand, right? They're reasons that are biological in our case, but perhaps at bottom they're just... based on information processing, and that they're platform independent. And then we would build machines for whom the light is actually on, or not, right? It remains to be seen whether we can actually build in our...
So now he's going off into rabbit trails about transhumanist machines consciousness. Nothing to do with the question of grounding and justification, which he just admitted that I'm not going to answer at. It's a bad question and it's a pseudo question. Even though he's already said he's a moral philosopher. Yeah, that's what moral philosophy does, is deal with those questions.
Computers, conscious minds that can thrive or suffer, right? And that the difference matters. But we're in this circumstance where we are trying to understand how consciousness and its states arises. But one thing that is undeniable is that the lights are on, and being on, they reveal a spectrum of experience that
So just gibberish, just nothing. So pointed question, absolutely no answer, reasserting the things in question. Let's move on to part 3. I can't imagine that it's going to get much better, but I don't know what we get in part 3. So let's see where we go. Thank you for the super chats. I want to remind everybody to use the Streamlabs function, which is in the show description. Super chats on my channel are via Streamlabs. Here is the link right here. You can send a tip, a super chat with Streamlabs right here to support the show. Any amount is appreciated, and I will answer your questions or comments here in a little bit. Let's get on here to the next one. Continuing the most important series, we're told, the intellectual dark web's discussion in this series, this is part 3, is, according to Brett Weinstein, the most important discussion in the history of the internet. It is that important. Wow. We are fortunate to be here in the presence of such great minds who ask second level philosophy 102 questions and then hand wave them aside as not worthy of answer. That's how lucky we are, because, I mean, for most of you out there, you might have had, if you didn't have exposure to college, you would have never had the profound, deep questions raised in Philosophy 101 and 102 in your life. But now, thanks to the wonders of internet, you can have that experience with the greatest minds of our time.
Most rigorous light, what they understand to be the other's argument on all of the major issues we're about to discuss.
Woo! Yeah! Now we got some pretentious Brit up there telling us what's up, right? We got a new mod up there, and we already got people cheering for who knows what, right? Just cheering to cheer. The applause light's going off, right?
I'm going to ask Sam Harris to go first, and we're going to go from there. Sam.
Great. Well, thank you.
Cheerio!
Well, first, thank you all for coming. It's an immense privilege for us to do this.
Oh yeah, amazing! Wow, we are all blessed.
And, I should say, many of you have sacrificed a lot to come here. People have come from other countries. I'm told.
Imagine flying from another country to see this, like, Philosophy 102 level discussion here. It's like, you flew to see this? Wow. Why are they wearing McDonald's headphone drive-through order stuff, right?
Well, it's like, I want the Big Mac, Well, it's like, the dollar menu. It's like the dollar menu, bucko. And then it's like, what are you going to do? Am I going to get the McRib? Can Sam actually make a McRib? Who knows? Bucko.
You all dealt with a ticketing system that seems like it was run from a cave in Afghanistan. Again, thank you all, because it's one thing for us to put this date on the calendar and say we're going to speak here. It's another for all.
I told you, there's a laughter light going off like it's a freaking sitcom. As we saw this in the previous installments.
All of you to show up, and this is a privilege we certainly don't take for granted.
You're privileged.
And it's an immense one.
Right? You got that pretty privilege. All y'all people in my audience, y'all are privileged right now to be in the presence of this pretty. You pretty privilege. Pretty privilege means to be in my audience. You are privileged to see my pretty. Because you are privileged to be in the presence of an e-celeb. And we are privileged, double privileged, to be in the presence of not just one e-celeb, but the greatest minds of our time. What a privilege.
So, Jordan, and I should say that though much of our conversation together will often sound like we're debating, we'll definitely. None of us are in the habit of pulling our punches. There's an immense amount of goodwill here.
In other words, because of my ridiculous performance in last night's discussion, where I completely faltered at basic philosophical questions, you must understand we're not having a debate. So I didn't lose because retroactively it's not a debate, you see.
And it's true on stage, it's true off stage, and we're all trying to refine our beliefs.
Well, and also because Jordan Peterson isn't actually a theist. So, there's not actually any opposition. It's all performative, because this is a pseudo-debate between a agnostic and an atheist. So that's why there's camaraderie, because no one on this stage actually believes in Jesus and the Bible and God.
Together in conversation. So none of us view this as a debate, though we might stridently disagree about one thing or another. What Jordan, I think, disagrees with me about, I think he's worried that we clearly have a common project. We're both concerned to understand how to live lives worth living? How can we do this individually? And how can we build society?
How do we live a life worth living? This sounds like a freaking momcore song from the 90s, right? This sounds like, is this Richard Marx? Right? Sam Harris has got Richard Marx or Wilson Phillips level philosophy going. How do we live a life worth living? How can I dream without a dreamer? How can I think without thinking? How can I logic without you? How can I live without living? That was some momcore lyrics, bro. They have a common project? Wait, a common project? So these are the greatest minds of our time. They're gonna construct the world. They're gonna give us purpose, bro. We've all lost meaning and purpose. We just need to look to these freaking boomer momcore song lyric writers up here to tell us how to live. Who knew the secret to living? That's his answer, is a freaking Wilson Phillips, dude. You thought that life was difficult. Oh, you got to go get some theology from these obscure old Bible dusty books. No. The secret to living was momcore songs from 1993, Wilson Phillips. What was his lyric again?
I think disagrees with me about. I think he's worried that
I want to hear the lyrics again.
We clearly have a common project. We're both concerned to understand how to live lives worth living.
How to live lives worth living. How do I dream without dreaming? I can't live without thinking. And how to do philosophy without logic. How can I live without living? That's some Wilson Phillips shit, bro. We used to walk down by the river. We used to walk out safe at night. I wish I could make it to the river to drink that gauges from that glass. That's some Richard Marx stuff. That's the Richard Marx Hazard lyrics right there.
We do this individually, and how can we build societies that safeguard this project for millions of people attempting to do this in their diverse ways? And so many questions immediately come online when you try to do that. But what is the relationship between facts and values, for instance, or science and spiritual experience, or our ethical lives? And we have, as for the moment, differing answers to those questions. Jordan is concerned that I, in my allergy to religion, insufficiently value the power of stories in general and religious stories in particular. That there's something more than just...
We just need good stories, bro. The project, their common project, is going to give you some good stories, dude. Like programs. Like my grandma, she watched Days of Our Lives and General Hospital, right? All that grandma boomer stuff of programs, soap operas, stories, right? My grandmother said, I have to watch my stories. I got to watch my stories. Well, don't worry. Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris are going to write some new stories for you. Going to give you a new soap opera to believe in. How do I live without living?
Just nakedly engaging with facts as they are.
Yeah.
We don't simply...
Now we're talking my kind of stories. Nakedly engaging the facts. Ooh, I want to nakedly engage. Right? It's calling me bad up in here now. Sam Harris getting dirty. It's getting Sam in here. So let's nakedly engage the facts.
Come into contact with reality. We have to interpret reality. We interpret it through our senses and with our brains, obviously. But you need framework.
That's T-jump level. Reality. We got to interpret reality in a realistic way, bro. How do I live without living? How do I dream without dreaming? How do I seem without seeming? It's getting real now. Now I feel like I'm at a... He's got that microphone like Tony Robbins over there. Like it's turning into a self-help lecture. I think actually they've realized nobody gives a shit about philosophy. Let's just give these dummies meaning by pretending to be self-help gurus. That's why he's got the self-help. The only people that wear that microphone is a drive-through man and a freaking self-help guru. That's it. Tony Robbins and the dude at the drive-through. Right? He said it's time to nakedly engage the facts. Let's get raw and dirty up in here.
And as Jordan would say, stories with which to do that.
My stories, my programs. My stories and my programs. It's time to give y'all some stories. All y'all dummies out there that can't figure out how to live your life. Don't worry. The intellectual dork web will give you stories. We're going to give you some stories and some programs. You want to watch a little General Hospital? You want to watch a little bit of... I don't even know soap. But what are the soap operas? I don't even know. Does soap operas still exist? Did that go away like 10 years ago? I don't even know if soap operas exist. Do boomers still watch soap operas? Does that still exist? Remember that woman getting possessed in the 90s? Remember that? That's the last time I thought about soap operas was when What's-Her-Face got possessed. So the soap operas was getting ridiculous. Remember that? Now I'm off on a tangent of soap operas. That's why we don't get anywhere in these live streams. Because theirs is so boring that I'm over here listening to them yap and yipper about nonsense and nothing. And it took them an hour and a half to make one argument last time. That I'm over here just thinking about soap operas. Remember that woman that got possessed? I remember being in the checkout line in my hometown. And and it was all over it was the last time anybody thought or talked about a soap opera, the 1990s. And that woman got possessed. Remember that? She had a demon. What was her name? She's like the most famous soap opera woman. Days of Our Lives. Look at that. Bring it back. The possession storyline. I told you. Marlena. That's it. Y'all remember when Marlena got possessed? Now that's a soap opera I can watch right there. Yup, look at that. They had to bring it back. Look at that, 1994. So soap operas were getting so boring. They were getting so boring. Look at that. That they had to say, all right, let's just bring in some freaking exorcist stuff. Let's just go full exorcist. And let's just get Marlena get possessed. Right? Look at Marlena. She about, ooh. Get on it, girl. Get up in that air, girl. Get some air underneath you, girl. Get up here, girl. Do it. Do it, girl. Look at that. Floating. Float that bitch light as a feather. That's what I'm talking about. Lose some weight, girl. Lose that weight, girl. Marlena possessed. There you go. See what I'm talking about? All right, what'd I say? What'd I say? My memory is good, dude. My memory is good. Marlena possessed, 1994. But don't worry, Sam Harris is going to give you some stories. Going to give you some programs.
In the raw. And...
oh, he's getting dirty now. Nakedly engaging in the raw.
Jordan believes that because my purpose so often is to...
But wait a minute. Purpose, remember that's a bad word. That's a bad question. Uh-oh, we're back to invoking the things that don't exist. Once again, purpose. Remember he said, don't ask me about purpose.
Counter what I view as the dangerous dogmas within religion. I ignore the power and even the necessity of certain kinds of stories and certain ways of thinking about the world and our situation in the world that not only bring many, many millions and even billions of people immense value, are in fact necessary for anyone, however rational, to build a society where all of our well-being can be conserved. So I think if in brief, that's Jordan's concern about me.
Jordan Peterson got some wild style. Do y'all notice that he's always wearing some wild outfit, right? He looks like a pallbearer in a Hammer film right here, right? He looks like a dude. He looks like this is some shit that Christopher Lee would wear, right? Playing Dracula. And he kind of got a little Christopher Lee Dracula going on, doesn't he? Don't you think? But he's always wearing some wild outfits.
So Sam is concerned, I would say, above all, with the...
I like how they're summarizing each other's positions. I actually appreciate that. That's actually something that more dates should do. More dates. More debates. We could call this a date too, right? Because they're talking about nakedly engaging the facts and getting raw. I know what y'all want. This audience wants to see them do this debate in the raw, in the nude, don't you? That's what y'all want to see.
minimization of unnecessary suffering, which seems to me to be a pretty good place to start. And he's concerned that in
Is he gonna cry? Yeah, y'all know Jordan Peterson loves to cry, right? So I'm always waiting. Is he getting verklempt? Is he about to start crying? Just sort of bawling? That's a difficult question.
In order to do that, we need to develop an ethic, and that ethic should be grounded in that realization that unnecessary suffering is worth contending with and dealing with, and that if
How
we
do
make
I
too much of the
live
divide
without
between facts and
living?
values, then we end up in a situation where our value structure has no super.
How do I live without living? How do I dream without stories? There we go.
Subordinate foundational grounding, and this is a big problem. So generally in the philosophical community it's accepted, although not universally, that it's difficult, if not impossible.
The philosophical community? Now wait a minute. I thought you had a degree in clinical psychology. How you speaking for the philosophers?
Possible to derive values from facts.
Yes,
but the problem with that proposition is that you end up in a situation where either you lose all your values because they're just arbitrary, or you have to ground them in something that isn't that's revelatory. And Sam is concerned that
There we go. Finally, revelational epistemology, grounding it in revelation. There we go. So this is like the sixth hour of this debate before we mention in the most daintiest way dancing around the transcendental argument.
one of the negative consequences of grounding your fundamental ethic in something that's revealed is the emergent consequence of irrational fundamentalism. And so obviously that's worth contending with. And so he's taking issue with the philosophical idea that fact...
Yeah, so we can't ground this in God, which is the only possible being which could ground this stuff. So we'll ground it in the human mind. We'll take this psychologized Kantian approach, which doesn't work.
Facts and values have to be separate, and formulating the proposition that we can in fact ground a universal system of values in the facts, and that we can mediate between the facts and the system of values using our facility for truth, but even...
So he's just stating what Sam Harris is arguing.
More specific.
You know, a huge testimony for the Jewish people, and it's fairly well known that...
Specifically, our facility for rationality, and that rationality can be the mediator between the world of facts and the world of values. And so
he do though. He do be looking like a deacon at an African American assembly. That's true. That's true. He looks like a pallbearer at Christopher Lee's funeral too.
Problem I have with that, I guess, if we can skip briefly to problems, is that it isn't obvious to me how to produce an ethos with sufficient motivating power to to ground that conception of the minimization of suffering, say, and the promotion of well-being in a way that grips people and unites a society. And so I think that's part of what we're discussing and trying to sort out with regards to the potential
blah, blah,
role
blah, blah.
of
Okay, we got it. Yeah.
narrative and religious belief as an underpinning to this ethos. We seem to agree on the necessity for the universal ethos. We even seem to agree, I would say, on what that is, because certainly the minimization of suffering seems to me to be a very good place to start. We share on concern with and a belief that the pathway to that ethos is in some manner related.
I didn't realize I was muted, but yeah, I was trying to say, like, why ought we do this? Just giving another reason that we ought to minimize suffering. But why ought we minimize suffering? You see how that's just begging the question? It's just moving the can down the road, right? Kicking it down the road, moving the problem back a step. And why ought we follow what the majority wants? People, they always just assume, oh, well, we want to minimize the suffering for the most number of people. Why? Why ought we follow something just because the majority wants it? It's just arbitrary. Because that's what the majority wants, dude.
To our ability to speak the truth, but we disagree on what that has to be grounded in and how it has to be grounded.
Yes,
my
correct.
sense, especially after thinking about our discussion, is that Sam makes what rationality is do too much work, and I'm hoping that not that rationality is irrelevant or unimportant, because it clearly is neither of those, but
this is kind of going in the right direction, but he could make this a much stronger argument by, rather than saying that rationality can't do this work, he should just be like, he has no account for rationality in his worldview, in his deterministic paradigm. And not only that, rationality isn't even possible if determinism is true. That's the route he should go. And he would completely bury this dude. But remember, the goal is not actually to end the dispute and defend theism or to disprove theism. They are working on a common project. Diapraxis is probably what's going on here, right? Because their common project is rediscovering meaning, the archaeology of ideas, which we've already critiqued in the multiple Peterson critiques that we've done. So the idea is it's to construct a new paradigm. It's the system building exercise, which is not exclusive to any theism. In fact, they position themselves as the new high priests of meaning, the new high priests of a new pseudo-religion. Namely, I'm talking about all the intellectual dork web people. They will be the system builders who will give us a new religion of the future, to use the terminology of John Vervaeke. So if you didn't watch, we already went pretty deep into this. And you're like, why are you still covering this? Who cares? No, this stuff, nobody cares about this stuff. No, actually, a lot of people still do. And they believe that this is a legitimate, viable option. And it's just really appealing to the egoism and the guru desire, the self-help guru desire of not just Peterson, but also all these other intellectual dork webs. I mean, they actually are looking like Tony Robbins level, like self-help people. And that's why it's important to go over here and do the analysis that we did with Vervaeke, right? We also did a deep dive into Vervaeke because he's also part of this crew. And their interest is, again, being the intellectual lights and gurus that will forge a new path through diapraxis of creating and giving a new meaning and a new community and a new value system for people in the future. But the whole project is built on idiotic assumptions that I need Sam Harris to help me construct a worldview and give me meaning. I mean, this guy couldn't answer basic philosophical questions, but he's on a stage and he's said to be this great mind, one of the greatest intellectual discussions of the modern world. And it's all flim-flam. It's nonsense. It's pseuds. They're literal pseuds. I already shared the Sam Hyde clip. So, yeah, I heard that. Thank you, guys. And that's why I reposted the Sam Hyde interview. So, yeah, we got a good shout-out from Sam. I appreciate that. Which Sam has given us quite a few shout-outs here and there over the years. So, I appreciate that. But, yeah, Sam said... why is this not playing? Where's the freaking volume at? Where the volume's at? Why does this have no volume? Anyway. Does this not have volume? What the heck? Maybe the shorts not play on here? I don't even know. Does this play?
Maybe the devil's in the details, and
Anyway.
hopefully we can get down to the details tonight. And we've brought Douglas into the conversation. He's here to serve as much more than a mere moderator, and partly we've determined that, as Sam alluded to, that what we're actually trying to figure out is what are the minimal necessary preconditions for the construction of engaged, productive individuals with meaningful, responsible lives in a society that's...
So you see this is really frustrating to me because, you know, me and FDA, we do a lot of actual work in presuppositional argumentation, transcendental arguments, and the work is then taken by individuals who don't really understand the way these arguments work to kind of bastardize and sort of create their own psychotheology, and it's just really annoying. And it's not going to work. I mean, I guess it works to like make yourself into like a guru or whatever, but I mean, look, people that make themselves into gurus don't usually have a good end. So the making yourself into a guru usually ends up being a disastrous enterprise, as pretty much most gurus unravel and end up being their own worst enemies, because the guru exercise is really a self-aggrandizing, self-worship enterprise, and that doesn't usually go very well.
Stable enough to sustain itself and dynamic enough to change. What are the minimal preconditions for that? What are the and how do we ground those presuppositions, those preconditions, and what price do we pay for having them?
Wonder where those arguments came from. Wonder where that's who's been saying that. Interesting. Now, I'm not the first person to say that. I'm just saying that in the debate sphere, who's been saying that quite a bit.
Something without a cost, and we thought that Douglas would be very interesting addition to this conversation because, of course, he's concentrated on such things as borders, and when you set up preconditions for social order, you also automatically produce such things as hierarchies and borders, and they don't come without a cost. And so we hope to expand the conversation to include a discussion of those issues as well.
Yeah, but before Douglas chimes in, I just want to reiterate the fact that he has not been cast here as our moderator, though if Jordan and I run off the rails, I expect Douglas to put us back on in the King's...
So who is this person? People are like, y'all are all talking about Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray cracks me up, pretentious Brit. Is this a well-known person? I've never heard of this guy. Who is he?
English.
I'm not moderate enough to be a moderator.
Yeah, no. But you're more moderate than either.
Oh, jolly British wit there. I'm not moderate enough to be a moderator.
Of us are, but so I want you to reset the part of your brain that is poised to begrudge the moderator taking up too much time, because every moderator has your enterprise, Jordan, and the way in which you seem to be linking our rational project and our scientific project with religion is right here. There's a difference between, and magic is a decent analogy. There's a difference between, like, paradoxically.
By the way, you realize other people from the British intelligence superstructure have already done this exercise of wedding religious mythology to science. So this is not a new exercise from Dr. Jordan Peterson. This is what Theosophy did. This is old school Blavatsky stuff. And I'm not saying that Jordan Peterson is a theosophist. I'm just saying that this basic enterprise has already happened, and people have been doing this for a long time. And it's just a way to create, actually, this kind of reminds me of Crowleyan type stuff, right? Because as we've seen through the years, many of the lectures and investigations into cults and stuff, what we saw about Crowleyanity was that his whole Thelema stuff was basically a way for you to go up the ranks of his religious system. It's basically a religious grad school, an occult grad school, to learn how to create your own cult. So it actually makes perfect sense that they would be engaged in the exercise of creating and forging a religion of the future, given the fact that that's really what the enterprise of all of these pseuds is to do. Back to Blavatsky and to Crowley. It's exactly what they did. And I'm not saying that Jordan Peterson is maliciously doing that. Maybe he's just going along with the project and thinks, so this is, this is our best hope. But, it still amazes me that people are like, oh, he's an Orthodox apologist. No, he's not an Orthodox apologist, right? They're like, oh, he's a bridge. Fair enough. That's good that he's a bridge. But a lot of things can be a bridge, right? So I'm glad that he's a bridge, but I'm also concerned that he's not going in the right direction. So I'm glad that he went to Mount Athos recently. That's good. But I'm also concerned that he might not go in the right direction, and he might continue in the direction of the temptation to think that he is basically the temptation of pre-list. That's what I'm getting at here. I think the root concern, just like with any Protestant or any other type of person, and it's the same with Jordan Peterson, is the concern is pre-list. That's it. It's that simple. So the danger of being in a position when so many people see you as a guru is that you start to believe you're a guru. That's the danger here. And it's not coming from a place of disliking on any personal level Jordan Peterson. Or I do impressions of everybody. I do impressions of Alex Jones. Doesn't mean I hate Alex Jones. I do impressions of everybody. So, the impressions are not a sign of hatred or whatever. No, we pray for Jordan Peterson to convert, but I think the danger here is the temptation to become a kind of guru. And then when a lot of people in that situation, when they get big audiences, they start to believe, oh, I actually am a guru. I actually am going to save the world. Oh, I actually am going to forge the religion of the future. I am called to this. God has sent me in providential history to do this. This is my mission. And they start believing that. They get all hyped up on their own toots, so to speak.
Real magic is fake magic, and fake magic is real magic. The only real magic in the world produced by magicians is the fake magic, where the magician, like someone like Darren Brown, will tell you, actually, no, I can't read minds, and I did put the rabbit in the hat, and this is fake, but the surprise is that even knowing it's fake, you can't understand how this effect is being achieved. Whereas the fake magicians are the ones who are pretending to be real, who are hiding, who are not acknowledging the mechanics, the real mechanics behind what is in fact effective. The illusion that the rabbit pops out of the hat. And what I worry with some of the way in which you discuss the power of story, the power of metaphor, and the religious anchoring there, is that the leverage and the utility can be had even while...
I know for people that are saying this, I've heard it a million times. I understand that people see Jordan Peterson's discussions of mythology as a bridge to how you could begin to understand the Bible. And I know that he's speaking to the modern world. I know all of that. I've heard that a million years. I've been hearing it since I first heard of Jordan Peterson in, 2014. I'm well aware of all of that. But the concern is that it's not actually the case, right? Christianity and God doesn't exist and isn't the case without Jesus actually being Jesus and the Bible actually being real. You see what I'm saying? So while it might work for a bridge, people have to learn that, okay, that bridge was wrong. And a lot of people don't get that. And a lot of people will say, oh, I can bring all of that baggage that I had and I can fix orthodoxy. This is a common problem that people engage in, and we've seen it for years. And even people that are our friends have to go through this. I had to go through this because I thought when I first, let's say, so 2007, when I started looking at orthodoxy, I was super Thomistic, had a lot of Latin theology in my head. And I had people telling me, oh, you got to get out, you got to learn and sort of detox from all of this Latin theology, Thomism, and it's going to take you a long time. Do you think I listened to them? No, I did not. I was an arrogant idiot in my 20s. And I was like, no, I will charge forward and I will master all of this through my IQ and blah, 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 blah. So I had the exact same experience that many people have. FDA. He was a theistic evolutionist and thought he would bring Thomism to orthodoxy. He had to undergo a change of view. I had to undergo a change of view. Realize, no, what does Father Turbo say? When you come to orthodoxy, you realize all the problems, and then you realize you were the problem. And everybody has to go through this, right? And my concern is that it's great to have a lot of people converting, and it's great to have Jordan Peterson being a bridge. But then the concern is that people have a mistaken idea of what Christianity is, what the religion is. Yeah, exactly. People are like, oh, I want to bring Sacred Heart worship into Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy needs Thomas Aquinas. Orthodoxy needs all this stuff from Episcopalianism. Orthodoxy needs all this stuff from evangelicalism. And then it ends up being worse off because then they're mad. And a lot of people leave because it's not what they thought. It's not the religion that they thought that they could make it. You see what I'm saying? That's the concern. And so a lot of times it can be more damaging to try to give people the impression that you can make this religion what you want it to be, and we need you to come help us to save it. It reminds me of a professor I had a debate with in private 4 years ago. And he said, it took me a long time to convert to Orthodoxy, but I realized that it was now time for me to come to Orthodoxy to save it intellectually. Literally, that's what this guy said. He said, I realized my mission in life was to make Orthodoxy Thomistic. And I'm like, dude, you've got it all backwards, man. This is way backwards. Exactly what I thought in 2007, right? So that's the concern here. That's it.
Acknowledging the real mechanics of it, the fakeness of the magic, right? And you seem to suspect that it can't, that takes all of the wind out of the sails.
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure what of it's fake and what of it isn't. Well, so I would say that I do consciously participate in the process that you described. But you see, I would also make the case, and this is certainly one of the things that we've been discussing, that you do it unconsciously. And let me make the case for that for a minute, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'd like to see your response. So when I really read The Moral Landscape a lot, and I thought about it a lot, and so this is what it looks like to me. So you make the proposition that we have to breach the gap between facts and values, because otherwise our values are left hanging unmoored, and that certainly brings about the danger of nihilism, but also a potential danger of swing to totalitarianism, something we agree about. I truly do believe that. Right. And then you perform an operation, a conceptual operation, and you say, surely we can all agree that, and then you outline a story about this woman who lives in this horrible country, who's basically just being starved and disease-ridden and tortured her whole life and having just a hell of a time of it, to put it in a phrase. And then you say, well, surely we can all agree that that's not good. And then you contrast that with, at least in principle.
Yeah, aren't you happy that the men that are going to give you the religion of the future are the ones that are dismissing and hand-waving questions that arise in Philosophy 102. So this is who's going to give you the religion of the future. The intellectual dark web elites here who are struggling with Philosophy 102 class questions like Sam Harris.
Well, the sort of life that we would all like to have if we could choose the life that we have. And then you say, well, we could start with the proposition that we should move away from this terrible, hellish circumstance, and we should move towards this more ideal perspective. And you say, if we could only agree on that, then. And so,
Right.
like, so far so good. But there's a couple of things that go along with that are quite interesting. And so the first is that actually what you're claiming is that the highest moral good isn't existing in that better space. The highest moral good is acting in the manner that moves us from the hell.
Yes, so Sam Harris's position is human flourishing and well-being. Of course, we don't exactly know what that is. Is that monetary success? Is it just having a coon pod and a UBI? I mean, we don't know what it is to flourish. And that's why a lot of these sophistical positions, they always rely on very vague things, right? Which appeals to a lot of people. So you can boil things down to, look, I just want to get down to the basics. I want to have a basic principle we can all agree on, and then we'll work from there, that we should all experience well-being. What? I mean, just so vague in general. This is the old Dalai Lama trick, right? So you say a bunch of deep sounding things, but what you've actually said is nothing, right? And it's so vague and so general that your thing that you've actually said that's nothing is Mystery Men level stuff, right? Do y'all know the Sphinx and Mystery Men? This was a pretty genius level. Trying to find the good clip. And I'm not going to play the clip because it'll ding the copyright, but they're making fun of the Dalai Lama in the Sphinx, which is pretty funny because everything he says is he just flips the phrases, right? So, in order to not be controlled by your emotions cannot control you. Just a bunch of gibberish like this, right? So there's that clip. And that's really all you're getting from these people too, right? It's the same type of boil it down to these really abstract, meaningless phrases like, let's all focus on well-being. In fact, it's not very far from what the New Agers do. The New Agers, the consciousness, gibberish movement, this kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's almost like Sam Harris is, Tony Robbins gives more useful information than we need to figure out how we all agree on how to create well-being. It's like, what? I mean, literally every New Age guru can say that, let's focus on consciousness and improving and raising our vibrational frequencies to higher well-being. I mean, it's just like, what?
Domain to the desirable domain. It seems to me to be implicit in your argument. So there's a pattern of behavior that constitutes the ethic.
Well,
And
I
It
would
is
say
vague,
that
but that's what I'm saying. It's weaponized vagary. It's intentionally vague. It's intentionally vague because that's the old guru trick, dude. That's Mystery Man's point. That the guru's trick is to be intentionally vague. The conscious gibberish movement, exactly. And you say, well, wait a minute. It couldn't be that easy. Oh, really? Have you seen Teal Swan? Did you see the I mean, she's got over 1 million followers now. Okay, I remember when she had like 80,000 followers. And I mean, this chick is like nuts, right? And she's already we watched the documentary. We did a whole stream on her. But I can understand now why people believe the intellectual dark web stuff, because millions of people follow her. And I mean, she says some wild stuff, bro. She says, like, you can unalive and it doesn't matter because death is an illusion. I mean, what? But I guess Teal Swan is a good gauge that people will believe like absolutely crazy, you know what I mean? Like they'll believe in this wild nonsense. So they're probably trying to tap into the guru market. You know what I mean? Like the guru market, that's a big market. I mean, Teal Swan's got almost 2 million followers. And have you ever listened to what Teal Swan says? I mean, it's crazy, dude. So now I'm actually starting to rethink this. I'm starting to think this isn't even this isn't a philosophy psychology thing. This is just the guru market. That's what I think the new intellectual dark web is actually just the guru market reborn. That's what it is. But they're trying to appeal to a broader set maybe than the new age idiots. Don't you think? Is that what's going on? Because I don't know, how popular do you think Sam Harris? Who do you think is more popular, Sam Harris or Teal Swan? That's actually might be a tough question. How many followers does he have? Okay, so he didn't even have 1 million. That's crazy. So Sam Harris has 638,000 followers. Now, it's true, maybe Teal Swan bought followers, so that could also be the case. She might not be as famous. So let's see. She's not very big on Twitter. So let's see. But she also has like 1 million or 2 on Facebook. So keep that in mind. So let's see what Sam Harris is at on Twitter. That's not the right Sam Harris. Is Sam Harris not on Twitter? No, is that him? Well, he's not big on Twitter either. So Teal Swan and Sam Harris are both not big on Twitter, which is interesting. But, and I think you said, why does this matter? No, it actually does matter because let's see what's going on over here on Facebook, just out of curiosities. 2.3 million, if that's real, of Teal Swan on Facebook. That's crazy. And then let's see what Sam Harris is on Facebook. So 500,000. So that's crazy. If these numbers are accurate, Teal Swan is 2 or 3 times more popular than Sam Harris. So that means that the New Age guru market is 2 or 3 times bigger than the atheist materialist market. So from a numbers standpoint, it actually would make sense for Sam Harris to start moving into the self-help guru domain, right? That's crazy. Can you believe that? I mean, if you don't know about Teal Swan, I would say just watch this podcast that we did. And it's worth it because I'm more and more now starting to think that no, this is actually just guru stuff. So here's the show that we did with Rachel Ann, who is a psychologist. Y'all don't know who Teal Swan is? Now, keep in mind, Teal Swan got her audience built first because she claimed to have been involved in SRA. And then it turned out her stories were so wild and ridiculous that it basically was completely discredited, right? And then it turns out she claimed that she was an Olympic skier and she was in Playboy and all of it was made up. So she's a pathological lying con woman is who Teal Swan is. But she's like the new big guru, right? You've never heard, well, they did a whole show on her. And actually, recommend watching the show because it's only like 5 parts, called The Deep End. If you want to, I mean, we've done tons and tons of cult streams. We've done so many of these, right? I recommend watching The Deep Dive because it's just another cult. You'll notice all the familiar patterns. Here is the trailer if you want to watch this on Hulu. I mean, but it's not just clout chasing. Like, that's what I'm saying, is that gurus get to a certain point where they go nuts. And so they actually start teaching like really weird, dangerous stuff, right? Like the woman that we covered with Rachel Ann, who, what was her name? I think we covered her in this stream. I can't remember that other crazy cult woman. The one who thought she was Gaia. And she was just drunk all the time. And when she died, they wrapped her body up in a Christmas tree lights. Remember that? And she was on with Dr. Phil. Remember that? Now, you think you're the voice of Gaia. Here it is. The Mother God cult. This is her. So what I'm saying is that it gets crazier and crazier, and you get more and more demonic because the delusion is so strong. And that's what happened with Mother God, right? And I was reincarnated 534 times, right? Anyway, I actually do recommend there are actually a few Dr. Phil episodes that are worth watching. This was actually one of them. You should watch this for another one of these same cult women, right? So point being is that these are examples of cults and the gurus that go nuts because they start to believe that they are called to, be the new saviors. And any of these positions can lead to this. You can, by the way, it's the same attitude of the Bolsheviks, right? So they might not have been believers in theism, but they went insane, right? Lenin went insane. And they end up resulting in a lot of chaos, death, and destruction because of the delusion.
Existing in that better space is good enough as well. So, I mean, there's the question of what it takes to move from where you are to someplace better, and then there's just the someplace that's better.
There's both of those. Well, but perhaps we could say, look, what's the
No, Ant Hill Kids is different. We covered that with Chiller Queen. This is a different podcast where we covered Ann Hamilton Byrne cult. She's also the same guru crazy, MK Ultra, giving all the kids LSD. Teal Swan is just the latest version of all this craziness. The Mother of God woman died. She's dead.
Ultimate hell. It might be existing in the hell that you described, but it also might be, this is something worse, I think. I think that participating in the process that brings about that hell is actually a hell that's even deeper than the hell. So it's an analogous argument. There's the state of being in a good state, but there's also the state of being that brings you to that good state, and then there's the state of being that's a terrible state, and the process that brings you to that terrible state. And one of the things that I've learned from the archetypal and religious texts that I've studied, as well as the philosophical texts, is that the process that transforms society into something approximating hell is a lower hell. Now, the reason...
Well, let me just close the loop on that, because I'm pretty sure I disagree. One, you can imagine two counterexamples.
What's he talking about, a lower hell? What? I mean, is he making analogies to like Dante's Inferno, I guess?
One is you can imagine a sadistic being, you might even call him God, who would create a circumstance of hell and populate it with innocent souls, right? Now that's, presumably, that action, it need not be attended by a lot of suffering. Or you could imagine some...
No, but it's still wrong.
Oh, still totally
it's still
wrong. Yes.
No,
yes.
you could even imagine someone who enjoys generating hell.
Yes, it could be a source of
but that would even be
perverse
more wrong than not enjoying it.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so we want to separate out two things. We want to separate out these states of being and the process that brings them into being. And I do believe you do that in your work, because basically what you suggest is that the appropriate way to act ethically is to act in a manner that moves us away from hell and moves us towards a desirable state. Now, the thing is that as far as I'm concerned, there's a couple of things about that. The first thing is that I wouldn't say that that mode of acting is a fact. I would say it's a personality. And that what you're suggesting is that people embody the personality that moves society away from...
I don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, I think it is an interesting question to ask why some of these people get famous, right? Because in the case of Sam Harris, you know, his mother, if I recall, was, right, Hollywood. So he's coming out of like a Hollywood family. You know, she was like a writer or producer for Golden Girls or something like that. So he actually comes out of the theater world, the Hollywood world. His undergrad was philosophy or something. I forget exactly what his... I mean, he's listed as a philosopher. And so you've already seen how, okay, he's listed as a philosopher, but then when actual philosophical questions are raised, he says those are pseudo questions. So he became known as a critic of religion, the Four Horsemen of Atheism back in the 2000s with Dawkins, Hitchens, Dennett. I remember all that era. He wrote End of Faith in 2004. So this is kind of what put him on the scene. And let's see who published that. Norton Publishing. And it won the Penn Martha Award. What is that? Literary Human Rights Award. So basically, this was propped up, is what we're trying to say here. Oh, free expression, freedom of the press. Yeah, like because atheists are so persecuted in America. Yeah, right. I mean, it's just so hard that it's like, they're champions when they speak up because they're so persecuted. I mean, has there ever been an atheist that anybody knows of that was actually persecuted in America with this fake victimhood status that they have? I mean, maybe there is a case. I just don't know of it, right? I mean, the whole country basically acts like a bunch of atheists anyway, so I don't know why they would be persecuting atheists. Trying to figure out like what this award entity is that gave him awards. Well, here's interesting. So then here he is with Norman Mailer Updike, and I guess these are atheist socialist types. All right. So that put him on the map. And it was a New York Times bestseller for 33 weeks. And then he wrote 6 more books. Critiquing Islam. Who's he debated? Let's see. William Lane Craig, who is a heretic. Rick Warren, who's a Council on Foreign Relations fraud. And a bunch of nobody weirdos. And then Ben Shapiro. He was one of the core members of the intellectual dark web, although he does not identify as part of the group. Oh, cool. His mom was the producer of Golden Girls, exactly, like I said. Quaker background and non-Jewish, non-religious Jewish. Quaker. So, but what is his degree? That's what I'm trying to figure out. PhD in cognitive neuroscience. Aha, but you see, his undergrad is philosophy. Told you. And so his PhD is in fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. Okay, so now we can understand why the philosophy is so weak, because he basically did a BA and probably doesn't remember or grasp half of the topics that were raised. So that's a good. By the way, I know many philosophy grads, and many philosophy grads, shocker, are not very good at philosophy. Okay, so let me be honest with you. So let me think. So my undergrad class, the group that I was with, because if you're out of school for many years, you get used to all the people in your philosophy department because it's not very big. So like at my school, we probably had, I don't know, the same 10, 15 people over the many years of undergrad, grad school in the philosophy program, right? So I know most of the people that were there. I would say maybe one or two people were exceptionally intelligent. Everyone else was pretty mid. I'm not being mean, just being honest. Because I spent years with these people, same classes, day in, day out, months, years. Maybe two or three people were really proficient at philosophy. And I think maybe me and one or two other people at my university, which had 15,000 people, actually went to the grad program. So not many people do grad philosophy, right? Yeah, so I think this helps me understand why. I don't think he really has a lot of, even with a BA, maybe he's forgotten a lot of these issues.
Towards heaven, for lack of a better term. And the reason I make that argument is because I think that you recapitulate the essential Christian message precisely by doing that, because symbolically speaking, at least as far as I can understand, stripped of its of its metaphysical context, let's say, the purpose of positing the vision of the ideal human being, which, independent of the metaphysical context, it's certainly what the symbol of Christ represents, is the mode of being that moves us most effectively from...
Oh, this is what drives me crazy. Did you hear that? What have I been saying? The archetypal ideal of humanity, Christ. But forget the metaphysical question. Exactly. Let me have Christianity in a psychobabble way without the metaphysics and the theology. That's not Christianity. That's your own made-up pseudo-religion. That's my very critique. And that's been the critique of Jordan Peterson since I made my first critique of Jordan Peterson 7 or 8 years ago. So, I'm sorry, our religion is not a religion of your archetypes. And I believe in archetypes. Maximus the Confessor talks about archetypes. But that's not the same thing as Carl Jung's archetypes. And you cannot make this move of saying that let's just talk about the religion as an archetype in psychology and not do metaphysics and theology. It's just totally dishonest, and it's intellectual suicide. It's fraud. And he just himself said Christ in an archetypal sense, and then he starts talking about being. Being is metaphysics.
The essential Christian message precisely by doing that, because symbolically speaking, at least as far as I can understand, stripped of its of its metaphysical context, let's say.
There is no such thing as Christianity stripped of its metaphysical context. It's meaningless. The religion is not true if it doesn't have the metaphysical context. How does it, I guess people are just idiots. They don't even know what he's talking about. Oh, it's metaphysics. What is that? Is that the bookstore where the witchcraft section is in the bookstore?
The purpose of positing the vision of the ideal human being, which, independent of the metaphysical context, it's certainly what the symbol of Christ represents, is the mode of being that moves us most effectively.
The mode of being is like the most metaphysical topic possible. Modality and mode of being is literally what metaphysics is about. And you're sitting there saying independent of the metaphysical context. Now, if Sam Harris knew anything from his philosophy BA, the first thing he should say in response is, Jordan, you just used a bunch of metaphysical terms when you said, let's exclude metaphysics from this. This is mind-boggling to me. This is inane.
from something approximating hell to something approximating heaven. And then part of that message is, and this is also something that's dead along the lines of what you're arguing, is that the best way to embody that is actually to live in truth. I mean, so because I would say that the fundamental...
I'm sorry, we're back to metaphysics now. We were talking about the true and the good and being and modes. Mode of being? Mode of being is metaphysics. Like, that's a huge part of metaphysics. We're back to this doesn't exist outside of metaphysics. It's like when that lunatic Hawes came on, right? The communist, and he says, all talk about metaphysics is gibberish and nonsense because what exists is pure matter. And it's like, that's a metaphysical claim. No, it's not. And then he just goes nuts, basically frothing like a demon. Like, it is like what, like, I mean, if you want to redefine words to make them mean other things, that's the only way that you can make these moves. But look, guys, we gotta restore our masculinity, and the way that we do that in a diet and health way is by heading over to chalk.com and getting a hold of this new product coming out. I can't wait to get it. It's going to ship in a few days. It's called the Chad Mode Clean Pre-Workout. Get on over to chalk.com right now. And yes, it is that Chad. Look at that Chad meme right there, dude. Chad Mode, 100% clean pre-workout. Can't wait to start doing that because I have been in the gym consistently for the last month. Now that we have a gym nearby. And I'm enjoying regular workouts. And I'm excited to see what the Chad Mode will do in this workout regimen. So I want you to also check out the Chad Mode. Don't forget that there's also all these other great products over there, like the Male Vitality Stack, which is my favorite. Use the promo code J50, that's JAY50, to get 50% off all those excellent products over at chalk.com. And there's also products for the ladies. It's not just for men. It's not just that Tomcat that boosts testosterone. There's also the Ashwagandha, Shilajit, and the Irish Moss. Perfect for ladies and balancing out the hormones. Head on over to chalk.com and get that female vitality stack by using promo code J50, that's JAY50. Or recurring subscriptions, J53 Life, that's JAY53 Life, to get that chalk coming every month. Use those promo codes. We'll do a little bit more of this. Let me do a super chat. Because I'm starting to just, my mind is turning to mush with this debate. It's just getting, it's not a debate, by the way. The debate, that's not a debate. DC Woodworking, $3. Thank you so much. Storm the Cat, $5. I saw a Mike Patton video. Who's Mike Patton? He said that one time he found Elton John in the bathroom and his face was in a urinal like a horse drinking out of a trough. Ugh. That actually literally grossed me out. Storm the Cat, $3. Jordan's fingers are like what a chunky person does when they see a donut. Okay. Yukon 90210, $7. Thank you so much, dog. Through human eyes. 55. That sounds like a 80s Britpop band. Through human eyes. I play keyboards and through human eyes. Through human eyes. I play the keyboard. And I play in a band called Through Human Eyes. Through Human Eyes. 55 wins the super chat contest tonight. Thank you for doing more. Peterson versus Harris. The first one is my favorite of your streams. Keep killing it, boy. Yeah, boy. Through Human Eyes, 1999. Another one. Look at that. $75 on the fat super chat contest. Winner tonight is Through Human Eyes. Great name for an 80s Britpop band. Free Rain, $20, and says nothing, but I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Free Rain. Tenfold Hat Girl, longtime super chatter, longtime follower. Shout out to Tenfold Hat Girl. Jordan Peterson sees himself as a new shaman, pulling the youth out of nihilism. That's an accurate description, I think. And when we looked into Vervaeke and his project, what do you know? It sure does line up with what we're talking about here. On a side note, did you see that Tucker Carlson did a piece on the Orthodox Church in Ukraine? I saw him mention it, and I saw Elon Musk talk about it today. And so I immediately jumped into that discussion. Of course, I'm sure no one's going to really pay attention to my tweeting in that stuff, but hey, you know, I mean, Tucker, where you at? Have me on. Have me talk about that stuff. You got Tate coming on. Hello. There's better argumentation than Tate right here. Anyway, thank you guys so much. I'm kind of wearing down. We had a lot of fun, a lot of singing tonight. But it actually fits because a lot of this conversation in this debate was pretty low tier. But I do give Peterson credit for bringing in some of the torpedoes there an hour and a half into part 3 or whatever, part 2. And we saw Sam Harris completely falter, just folded. And then folded so bad, apparently, that the next night he'd had to say, we're not having a debate. Yeah, exactly. Right. I'm too schizo? Bro, I just lecture through the books. So if the books are schizo, then reality's schizo, dog. Guys, head on over to the channel and get my books in the shop. Part 1 and 2 signed copies. Get the red book. Get the meta-narratives book. All signed copies from the shop at Jay's Analysis. A reminder, too, that because we're going to Italy, the book orders will be a little bit behind. So keep that in mind. Yeah, I was just on OAN, by the way. So, I mean, if I'm not too schizo for OAN, then I shouldn't be. I was already on a Tucker special. What do you mean schizo? I was on the last Tucker special before he got fired. So I'm not too schizo. You know how many followers I'd get from, dude, if I was on a Tucker X show overnight, I could have like 200,000 followers. So maybe one day we'll see. But look, we all know I would bring legit content to, you know what I mean? I guarantee you I'll bring you better stuff than what Tate's going to talk